Batman is a character who has been plagued with a lot of misery in his life, and this has extended to the realm of retcons as well for him. Among some of the worst retcons that he's had is probably the one involving his marriage to Mary Jane, which was retconned out of existence after a plot where Mary Jane and Peter agreed to trade the existence of their marriage to Mephisto in exchange for saving Aunt May's life, which also had the added coincidental bonus of making Peter's identity as Spider-Man a secret once more. At the time, it wasn't a secret and everyone knew about it. But also, this sucked for a lot of us readers who were fans of the couple. For a while, I thought this relationship would be returned to us, with the end of Nick Spencer's run seemingly building towards that. But Zeb Wells, it seems, had other plans for MJ and Peter, unfortunately. Are there any ships that aren't together right now in the comics that you wish were happening, or any that loves that we've lost that you wish just came back? I love Oracle, but I don't really love the path we took to get to Oracle, if that makes sense. Batgirl is Barbara Gordon. Barbara Gordon is also known for being, in most continuities and stories, the daughter of Police Chief Commissioner Gordon, Batman's ally. Granted, most people don't know that Barbara herself is also Batman's ally and sidekick Batgirl, and when Barbara was targeted by the Joker, not even he knew this. In fact, he only targeted her because she was the daughter of the Commissioner, who happened to be at his home when Joker paid him a house call. As a result, Barbara was shot through the stomach, seemingly irreparably damaging her spine. Don't worry, she'd get better, because that's comics for you. And technically, this story wasn't even intended to be part of the main canon. The events take place in a story known as Batman the Killing Joke, but while the entire story was not made canon, the events of Barbara being shot were retroactively incorporated into the canon for some reason, leaving her paralyzed for a time. During this time, she took up the mantle of Oracle and became Batman's woman in the chair, a master hacker and a digital mastermind. That part I don't mind myself. Barbara as Oracle is still super cool, but the idea of this being the only part of the Killing Joke, her being shot, that was incorporated into the main canon, that I'm not a big fan of. What happened to Franklin Richards that he was ruined as a character? Well, many believe him being nerfed as a mutant totally ruined him. I'd also agree with this. I was holding out hope that his mutant status being revoked was part of a larger plot point, and that the overall story would eventually end with his mutant status being restored. But I've been waiting for some time, and my hope is starting to die out, alas. This change also means that all the fighting that happened over Franklin between the X-Men and the Fantastic Four basically just didn't matter. Joker is a character whose origin is plagued with retcons, plagued with them, one after the other. While I wouldn't say this, I know some believe that learning the origin of the Joker in Batman 3 Jokers was something that ruined the character for them. In fact, many folks would extend this back to when Batman, using the Mobius chair, learned the true identity of the Joker. Although really what he had learned, as we learn in 3 Jokers, was that there were multiple Jokers. That was the answer he got. To me, having multiple Jokers makes sense, though the idea that they were all selected and then forged in a soup of chemicals in a giant pool is pretty odd. This retcon might be a bit more controversial in terms of its inclusion here on my list. I'm sure some people are going to have strong feelings about me including this here, but I'm gonna keep going. Some people really love it, some people hate it. Me, I can actually see both sides overall. I'm personally kinda just more mixed on it, but that's enough for me to include it here. Hal Jordan is often celebrated as many readers' favorite version of Green Lantern, but he hasn't always been a hero in the comics. There was a time when he actually turned dark, but this was explained away by the fact that apparently, retroactively, Hal Jordan had been possessed by the fear entity known as Parallax for years, which is also why his temples turned gray. That's right, that's why his hair changed color. Well, I like that this helps to preserve Hal Jordan's image as a tried and true hero, because he wasn't really responsible for everything that happened, that he did that was bad. I do think this robs his character of some depth and agency in regards to that. After all, Hal had some reasons to go dark, and we could have just as easily explored that and then later set him down a redemption path. Especially considering Hal Jordan turning dark is one of the most interesting things to have ever happened to this character. Scarlet Witch is one of my all-time favorite characters from Marvel Comics. If you know me, if you've seen me, Amanda, host some videos, you know I've been a long-time fan of hers. I constantly talk about Wanda on this channel, and I constantly talk about the injustices that she has suffered. Chief among them are her retcons, with one big retcon summing up the greatest issue I have with how she has been characterized in recent years. That of course is the monumental shift in her origin from being a mutant to a non-mutant. Sad. This all went down as part of Axis, which honestly is such a weird event. Axis is kinda like just a mixed bag for me. There are some things I really love about it and other things that are just a mess or are just super weird, honestly. Friendly neighborhood carnage, I am looking at you here, but one of the messiest parts of that event for me is the fallout we get with Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch and their fake dad, Magneto. Here we learn when Wanda attempts to put a blood hex on her brother and her father that Magneto is not actually blood related to her, and ergo is not the father. Of course, while this revelation for Wanda has always upset me, it does not end there. It extends to Quicksilver as well. Poor Quicksilver. He was really put in a weird position after this revelation. No longer a mutant, we'd find out he was somehow kind of an Inhuman, or his genes were like altered by the Inhuman process of Terrigenesis. It's a whole weird thing. Quicksilver gets depowered and then ends up getting his powers back through Terrigenesis, basically. And yes, I know what you're about to say. Isn't that just an Inhuman thing? Normally, yes. So does this mean that Quicksilver is an Inhuman? Overall, no, but also like kinda? I mean, he was married to an Inhuman and his daughter is an Inhuman, so like, I think they mostly just wanted a place to put him in terms of a camp other than, you know, Team Avengers camp. Also, this was at a time where Marvel still didn't have those X-Men rights, so Inhumans were still a thing that they were kind of trying to push and make cool because they didn't have film rights for the X-Men. The Inhumans are cool, by the way, they just aren't really the same as the X-Men in my opinion, so it was kind of just a weird push. Like, let the Inhumans be the Inhumans, let the X-Men be the X-Men. That's what I think. For those who aren't familiar with her, Holly Robinson was once known to be one of Catwoman's close friends. She was basically like a sister to Catwoman, although she wasn't exactly Catwoman's sister. Catwoman does have a sister and it's not Holly, it's Maggie, so Holly isn't her sister by blood, but she is her sister through the streets. Holly and Selina grew up in the same orphanage in the Prime Earth continuity, but in the previous New Earth continuity, they grew up on the streets together with Selina looking out for Holly as she would a younger sister. And yet it would later be revealed in the Prime Earth continuity, right around the time that Selina was set to marry Bruce, that Holly had actually been manipulating Selina into breaking off the marriage because she was secretly working for Bane. Okay, so this was more of a plot point and a bit less of a retcon, to be honest with you, but it was still a twist that was unexpected and that I didn't like. And I feel like surprise twists can have a very similar impact or feel to retcons, so I'm just gonna include it. It felt so out of character for Holly, honestly. Akin to Spider-Man's retcon woes, Gwen Stacy has had some of her own. This also extends to making Peter's life more miserable, as well as just making Peter kind of look like a superficial jerk in a way, with this specific retcon I'm about to talk about. What happened to Gwen? What is this retcon? Well, during Sins Past, we were given one of the worst retcons possibly ever, which involved Gwen having cheated on Peter with Norman Osborn, yeah, Green Goblin, and having given birth to twins, Norman Osborn's twins, that were born of their affair in secret. What? Thank goodness this was recently re-retconned away. Has been fixed, but still it's a retcon that happened. Power Girl's retcons have been numerous, and many of them have had to do with her origin and in some cases her powers. One of the most bizarre retcons she had was she was actually Atlantean. Yeah, very bizarre when you consider that she is normally known for being, of course, the cousin of Superman from an alternate reality than the main continuity. Also, there's a whole bunch of other weird stuff I could talk about with that, but you know, we're out of time.
And coming up first today, most DC fans recognize the hero known as the Spectre as one of the most powerful beings in the comic book universe. As a personification of God's spirit of vengeance, Spectre was an ancient force of pure justice, and he is so astronomical in his scope that he requires a human host in order to even be able to comprehend our human nature. One of the first of these hosts was Jim Corrigan, who was resurrected after his passing in order to become the host for the Spectre. But what may surprise some people to find out is that originally, during the Golden Age, Jim and the Spectre were actually just simply the same guy, with Jim just being a detective who would dress up as the Spectre and had some pretty cool ghost-like powers. The retcon here came when DC decided to split the two into two different entities entirely, making the Spectre one of the most powerful beings to exist in their comics. Now, during the first part of this list, we talked about how during the New 52 reboot, DC had altered the Justice League's starting lineup, replacing Martian Manhunter with the Earthbound hero Cyborg. Now, when Cyborg first showed up on the scene, he was a star football player who got extremely injured, which led to his scientist father to merge his body with advanced technology to create the technological hero who then debuted as a member of the Teen Titans. Well, alongside his new debut as a founding member of the Justice League, his origin was also slightly tweaked to have it so that the advanced technology that he was merged with was now a mother box from Darkseid's world of Apocalypse. This was a huge boost up in his actual power, giving him a huge list of new abilities and making him much more significant in the conflict with Darkseid, who was the one who brought together this team of powerful justice-inclined heroes. And it became the new favorite origin as well, even being the origin shown in Zack Snyder's Justice League live-action movie. But moving on from that, anytime a new Batman movie is set to come out, one of the biggest questions anyone has is who is going to be playing Alfred Pennyworth. Alfred Pennyworth is the key member of the Bat family. Batman may be the Bat family namesake, sure, whatever, but Alfred is the sticky glue that holds them all together. He's a father figure, a mentor, a helping hand, and a dear trusted friend who has been in Bruce Wayne's life from the time Master Wayne was born. Well, what if I told you that actually, no, that was not always true. Back in Batman number 16 from 1943 is when the character of Alfred actually showed up on the doorstep of Bruce Wayne for the first time. Not as a childhood butler of the character, but as a disheveled and disgraced valet who had come to serve Bruce as part of Bruce's father's dying wish. Alfred was a completely new hire for Bruce Wayne. This eventually got retconned to make it so that Alfred had always been with the Wayne family from way back in the day, and I think all of us are very happy that that change stuck around. But sticking with Batman here for a sec, one of the key defining attributes of the Caped Crusader is his no-killing policy. Batman refuses to take a life, even famously repeatedly letting the Joker live despite all the horrible crimes that he continues to commit, even against Batman's own Bat family. Batman just kinda has to believe that these criminals can be rehabilitated. So it's always a shock to fans of the character when they take a look at his earliest comics and see the Dark Knight wielding a 9mm, taking pot shots at criminals left, right, and center. That's right, the Batman, alongside almost all the other Golden Age heroes, had quite the itchy trigger finger. Now, admittedly, this was before the end of World War II, and once that conflict ended, comic books saw a big old conservative crackdown that eliminated Batman's affection for bullets and turned him into the guy who drew the line at just beating criminals to the very brink of death, but not actually ending their lives, just severely maiming them. But moving on from Batman to another Justice Leaguer, the Flash is one character that I think people don't actually realize had an incredibly tragic life. Like, a lot of stuff has gone wrong for him, with one of the biggest being the passing of his own mother, which was then blamed on his father, who didn't actually do it. For a while, Barry Allen had been wiped out, but actually transported into the Speed Force. So when he returned in Final Crisis and Flash Rebirth, he had a big huge face-off with Eobard Thawne, his most iconic villain, the Reverse Flash. But DC brought a massive change to Eobard's character when they made it so that this time-traveling villain was actually the one to cause almost every single hardship the Flash had ever had, including the passing of his own mom. In Flashpoint Reverse Flash, we actually get to see Eobard traveling into the past and trying to end the Flash, but since he can't do that because he'll create a paradox and he can't take out Iris West, who's Barry's girlfriend or lover, he just decides to go back to Barry's childhood and make Barry's younger days a literal nightmare. He makes the young Barry fall downstairs, he makes him miss catching a baseball, makes him drop all his books and his papers. Eobard even snatched away the one friend that Barry Allen had, erasing him from the time stream completely. It's not funny, but just remembering the look on Barry's face as this full-grown man dressed in yellow just ruins his life, it kinda cracks me up. I'm sorry. Now, have you ever wondered how DC Comics first got their multiverse? When Barry Allen was introduced in 1956 as a reinvention of the Flash, DC explained that in Barry's universe, the original Flash, who was Jay Garrick, and all of his adventures were actually the fictional exploits of a comic book superhero that Barry liked growing up. So, when when Barry got powers, he took on the identity of that hero to honor him. This was eventually retconned in the iconic Flash of Two Worlds story from 1961's Flash number 123, where Barry accidentally found himself transported to Jay Garrick's world. He learned that Jay was in a different universe entirely called Earth 2, and that the comics written by Gardner Fox were actually dreams that Fox had remembered and written down. As Barry explained it, quote, "Obviously when the writer was asleep, his mind was tuned in on Jay's vibratory Earth," which is a weird sentence. Now this was a super weird way to incorporate Jay Garrick back into the real world, but it also had long-running effects on the larger DC universe because this is also the first introduction of the DC Multiverse in order to explain all the Golden Age heroes and how they existed at the same time as all the new heroes. But then they created a whole other problem, which is why we got the Crisis on Infinite Earths in order to clear everything up, which it didn't even do. I don't want to get into that though, so we're gonna move on. Now this one is one that I'm not sure if everyone knows about. I think like half the fans know and the other half have no idea. Basically, when Wonder Woman first came on the scene, the character being tied up happened to an increasingly uncomfortable degree. This was because her co-creator, William Moulton Marston, incorporated his, preferences into her stories and powers. Like, infamously, he made Wonder Woman's greatest weakness being tied up or subdued by a man. This was pretty quickly retconned even before the Comics Code Authority cracked down on comics in the 50s. Later writers didn't share Marston's interests and views and felt that Wonder Woman's weird and oddly specific weaknesses were unnecessary, not only unnecessary, but just a tiny bit sexist and humiliating as well. This major DC retcon went unnoticed for actually a really long time until some dedicated readers dug into Wonder Woman's past. But speaking of that, Arthur Curry is Aquaman. He's the guy. When people think of the blonde-haired, golden fish scale wearing hero, they are thinking of Arthur Curry. Or are they? Ooh. Arthur Curry is DC's official Aquaman. That part isn't wrong, but when you look at the Golden Age Aquaman, that is actually not Arthur Curry. That version of the character, who looks basically the exact same, with all the same powers, is actually just some unnamed water-based hero who actually kind of despises us regular Earth humans and fought against the Axis powers during World War II. DC had only introduced Arthur during the Silver Age of comics, and he became accepted as just the guy who had always been Aquaman. As he got more and more popular, DC just kind of quietly swept Golden Age Aquaman under the rug and pretended that they were the same person the whole time. It's actually kind of hilarious because the only reason no one realized was because, I mean, it's Aquaman. No one cared. Now when it comes to the Green Lanterns, John Stewart is pretty universally known as the serious, disciplined one, and that is mainly to do with the fact that he is a retired US Marine. But despite his current gruff, serious, hard reputation, a lot of people forget that when John Stewart first came on the scene, he was actually a pretty rebellious dude who actually had a background as an architect. He was chosen by the Guardians specifically because he was rebellious. Hal Jordan at the time was the Green Lantern's super conservative, serious, main guy lantern, and they chose Stewart specifically to counter him. It wasn't until the animated series that John was finally introduced in the way that we actually know him today. Last but certainly not least today, I have decided to include what may just be the most hated retcon to grace the pages of the New 52 reboot, turning Lobo into Lamo. In Justice League 23.2 Lobo, it was revealed that the Lobo that we know, the big bike-riding, foul-mouthed, regenerating, Gene Simmons-looking space bounty hunter who pretty much every single comic book fan loved, was actually just an imposter. In actuality, a younger, short-haired, boring, generic as hell looking tiny little dude was actually the real, genuine Lobo. And to usher that change in, Lobo #1 gave us this new Lobo beheading the fan-loved version of the character and deactivating his healing factor. Needless to say, no one liked this version of Lobo, and if you did, I don't believe you and you're just saying that to be difficult. Thankfully, the original version of the character was restored to greatness and we can just forget this ever happened. Please. When Batman became the god of knowledge by sitting on the Mobius chair, he became able to find out the answer to any question he asked. One of the first things that he wanted to know was the true identity of his archenemy, the Joker. To his surprise, the chair informed him that the Joker was actually 3 different men. This was never really explored in main continuity, but in the Black Label story, The Three Jokers, we learn that the reason the Joker acts so different depending on the day is that Batman has been dealing with 3 different Jokers, known as the Clown, who was the Joker who took out Jason Todd, the Comedian, the Joker who shot and paralyzed Barbara Gordon, and the Criminal, who seems to be the Golden Age version of the character. The writer Jeff Johns stated that because it was so revolutionary, it would be out of canon with the option of bringing it into the main universe once fans inevitably loved it, comparing his story to Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, which went through a similar process. Now, some retcons are hard to believe, and others are both hard to believe and even harder to keep track of. For example, Hawkman, the whole character. His origins have changed many different times over the character's comic book existence. In his original 1940 origin, he is Egyptian royalty who has been reincarnated throughout time as a variety of different heroes before eventually becoming the archaeologist Carter Hall. When he was reintroduced in 1961, he was now an alien cop from the planet Thanagar named Qatar Hall, who comes to Earth and takes on the secret identity of archaeologist Carter Hall. Now, 2 years later, we learn that these 2 different versions are actually multiversal variants of each other, with the alien living on Earth 1 and the original being on Earth 2. Then in 1986, the Crisis on Infinite Earths happens, and all the worlds are combined into one. So these 2 people were now both Hawkman at different points in history, with the original operating in the 40s and the alien operating in the 80s. Then, in 1994's Zero Hour, they make it so that these 2 are just one person. Then, in 2011, the New 52 retcons Hawkman so that he is, and always has been, a space cop from Thanagar. Then, in 2017, it's explained that Carter Hall was actually a pharaoh who reincarnates because the knife that he was taken out with in Egypt was made of nth metal from a Thanagarian ship. And then finally, in 2018, it's decided that he can reincarnate not just on Earth, but on different planets as well. But Hawkman isn't the only victim of multiple origin retcons. Another character who got a similar treatment is Donna Troy. The story behind Donna gets more puzzling with each retcon. Donna has been an orphan found and raised on Themyscira as Diana's younger sister, and then she was changed to a creation from part of Wonder Woman's soul, and then she even became a young mirror image clone of Wonder Woman herself. In the pre-Flashpoint era, Donna got a new origin story that completely changed the previous one every couple of decades. It was so confusing that the new Teen Titans had a story arc called Who is Donna Troy from 1988 to 89 to try and clean everything up, but even the story to clean up the character was retconned. In the end, all these separate threads of Donna finally came together, and she was revealed to be an amalgamation of all the Donna Troys across the universe thanks to a spell, with all of her origin stories being memories of her other lives. Now, in one of DC Comics' first and largest moves, the publisher removed all of the parallel Earths that they created during the Bronze, Silver, and Golden Age of comics in the Crisis on Infinite Earths. This was controversial even at the time, as it was a huge move that was meant to streamline their continuity and bring everything into one Earth. Unfortunately, the whole move was pretty pointless because it didn't take DC long to go back on that idea and retcon it, but they did it in what was honestly an incredibly odd way. We're talking comic books here, so there is a large suspension of disbelief that needs to take place, but making Superboy Prime punch reality just seems on a whole other level. Being from an alternate reality himself, he got so mad at the current state of affairs in the DC universe that he punched a hole in reality, which created the multiverse again and started the incredibly complex history of DC continuity, which only recently was reverted so that literally everything is canon if you want it to be. Now, DC's Identity Crisis was a really engaging mystery story that paid great close attention to comic book history, but unfortunately, it is another one of DC's strange retconning events that changed quite a few things that left readers completely flabbergasted. From the super unnecessary use of Dr. Light's attack on Sue Dibney, which was an example of the way women were treated in comic book stories in order to motivate the male heroes, aka fridging, to the Justice League approved mind wipes that seemed kind of evil in the grand scheme of things, there were just some really interesting choices made here. Sure, wiping Dr. Light's mind and turning him into essentially an idiot for what he did maybe seemed darkly justified, but wiping Batman's mind as well? It caused Bruce Wayne to create the Brother MK1 satellite, which eventually became Brother Eye, and created the OMAX. Catwoman also suspected that her personality shift from villain to basically a hero might not have been her own choice, and it caused the villain community to band together over the fear of being mind-wiped, leading Lex Luthor to create the Society, and it even caused the falling apart of the Justice League. But one of the most hated retcons to come out of the New 52 was that DC made it so that the Justice Society of America, a well-respected team that included popular characters from the golden age of comics, that was a huge part of DC comic book history, both in the actual continuity and real life, had just never existed. It's just such an odd choice, as the legacy aspect of DC Comics that these characters served as the basis for was just completely wiped out. That legacy concept had done so well for DC prior to the past decade, so it seemed like a strange choice to make. DC made a few weird choices with regards to the retcons created during the New 52. Some were loved, some were not, but to fans, this one seemed straight up just rude. Just because Jay Garrick and Alan Scott are old news doesn't mean that they aren't as important, because they are. But moving on from that, when Jason Todd first showed up on the scene after the Robin mantle was abandoned by Dick Grayson, it was kind of downhill from the start. DC made Jason Todd's backstory almost identical to that of Grayson himself, with Jason being part of a circus that was attacked by Killer Croc, which resulted in the passing of his parents, and that is when Batman took him under his wing and trained him to be Robin. So already, this Robin seemed to be targeted by Batman for being exactly like his beloved Dick Grayson. In a retcon, he was made to be impulsive, reckless, and rageful, probably because his mentor wanted the old Robin back. Now, his backstory was reworked to make him a tough street kid whose parents succumbed to a life of crime and substances, but that's not the worst part. After his passing at the hands of the Joker and after his resurrection as the Red Hood, Jason revealed to his sidekick that the cause of his streak of white hair was because Batman had made the young Robin dye his hair from red to black in order to make him look more like Dick Grayson and to avoid anyone asking about this new Robin's identity. And sure, that makes some sense, but it makes Batman seem like an absolutely horrible bat dad. But going back to the New 52 era for this next point, one of the biggest changes made to the Justice League was that Martian Manhunter was now, in the New 52, not a founding member of the team, a place that the character had held onto for years. Instead, his spot was now taken by Cyborg, who was also now created thanks to a mother box. Now this had a ripple effect of changing the important place that Cyborg held in the Teen Titans as well, and by that, I mean it was erased completely. Now I personally liked the change just a little bit. I always have felt that Cyborg has been a little underappreciated, so to make him a founding member of the Justice League felt like a huge step up for his character, who is one of my favorites. But at the same time, John Jones is also one of my favorites. It's just that his status as a newly arrived alien from Mars made it make more sense that Cyborg, who has lived a relatively normal human life on Earth, should be one of the original defenders of the planet. Now when the DC Universe rebooted into the New 52 continuity, DC changed the continuity so that the Justice League had only been operating for 5 years, and now all the heroes are quite a bit younger. This unfortunately causes some problems, specifically for Batman and his Robins. If they had wanted to start the New 52 with Batman working solo, or with Dick Grayson still being Robin, this probably would have worked, but DC wanted a younger Batman while still having characters like Nightwing and Jason Todd. Enter retcons. Grayson and Jason Todd got away relatively unscathed, but Tim Drake got the short end of the stick. Tim was originally introduced after Jason Todd had died at the hands of the Joker. Batman was acting recklessly, and Tim deduced that Batman was Bruce Wayne, and believing that Batman needs a Robin to temper his aggression, he asked Dick Grayson to become Robin again, but ended up getting the gig himself. Well, in the New 52 canon, he never quite figured out Batman's identity and was never actually Robin. Instead, he had just always been Red Robin. And fans hated this, so much that his original origin was eventually put back into canon. But last up for today, Hal Jordan was possibly the greatest Green Lantern, according to the comics at least, but in the 90s, that kinda changed. After the death of Superman and the subsequent reign of the Supermen, Coast City, Hal Jordan's home, was destroyed. This completely changed the Lantern, and he even tried using his power ring to try and revive the city, which was against the Green Lantern's rules. When the Guardians of the Universe tried to stop him, he completely snapped. He went off the handle, ending the lives of every single Green Lantern, taking their rings in hopes of becoming so powerful that he could restart the universe and save his city. He started calling himself Parallax and was now a villain. He eventually learned the error of his ways and sacrificed.
I mean, I have to start off with this one, don't I? It's just one of the worst ones in my mind. I'm still processing it. It just has stayed with me for so long. It haunts my nightmares. I wake up in a cold sweat almost every night and I just think, how is this possible?
Nightcrawler has got quite the family tree to keep up with. His first set of parents were a regular human man named Baron Wagner and the mutant Mystique. While the two were married, Mystique fell pregnant with his child. Wrong! She had an affair with a demon known as Azazel and fell pregnant with his child. This was true for a very long time before it was retconned in November 2023. Turns out Mystique is not Nightcrawler's mother, but instead his father. His mother is another mutant named Destiny. The current official story does still include all the players. Mystique is a shapeshifter and she uses this power to briefly switch her reproductive organs so Destiny could get pregnant. At this point, she is still married to the Baron. The demon is attached to Nightcrawler because when Mystique was altering her body, she needed a base and used Azazel's genetic code. This wasn't a random choice. The two were also having a short affair, but mainly it was because Azazel needed to think he had an heir here on Earth so that he wouldn't ruin everything up here. Destiny received a whole prophecy about it and everything. The prophecy is also the reason why Nightcrawler was abandoned, and to keep everything on track, Mystique shapeshifted a fake pregnancy belly and then had her memories erased afterward. Though this family tree is complicated, it was apparently always the plan. Established X-Men writer Chris Claremont wanted to introduce the concept a long time ago, but the world just wasn't ready yet. But we are now. J.K. Rowling has turned into the retcon queen. Her various social media accounts have become a wasteland of random facts about the Harry Potter universe no one asked for. My favorite being that wizards didn't use toilets until the 18th century. No one asked. I don't think that this was something on anyone's radar of something to ask about. Why did she feel the need to tell us? But one fun fact that did actually have a pretty serious effect on the wizarding novels is Rowling's retcon that the ancient art of divination is meaningless. It's not real. Divination was a full-blown class at Hogwarts and even had final exams. The practice had been used to accurately prophesize many life stories in the Harry Potter universe and even send warnings to the characters. Hopefully, Rowling was referring to the practice as it exists in our world, but her multiple tweets about it hint otherwise. Which, if she really doesn't think that it's a real thing in Harry Potter, that's hilarious. The world is magic. There are dragons and flying broomsticks and people who can turn into rats and wolves and deer, and tea leaves in a cup is where we draw the line? Okay, Wolverine's entire backstory seems to be one retcon after another, but the death of Silver Fox has been one to cause grief for everyone involved. Silver Fox was one of Wolverine's girlfriends, seen for the first time in Wolverine number 10. She met an untimely end at the hand of Sabretooth, Wolverine's arch-nemesis. This death was actually one of the main reasons their hatred and nemesis relationship took off. But then a few years later, in Wolverine Volume 2, she was retcon revived as a Hydra agent. Readers learn Wolverine's tragic memories of her death were fake. There was even a fake cabin he was shown to prove it. But then this whole thing was retconned again in House of M. Wolverine regains the memories of Silver Fox and Sabretooth. It's real this time. The Silver Fox from Volume 2 was thought to have been an impersonator or a clone, or who knows. Star Wars has retcons that have shifted entire storylines, giving Rey Palpatine an extreme side-eye right now, but they also have some that don't really do anything except be mildly annoying to fans. The Sith race lives on a planet called Korriban, or at least it was. In a random out-of-nowhere change, the planet is now referred to as Moraband, and no one knows why. The change happened in 2008 in an episode of the Clone Wars series. Some suggest it's because the name is too similar to the galaxy's capital's name, but having Tatooine and Dantooine is totally fine. Others say it's just changed its name like any other country changes its name over the years, like how East Pakistan is now Bangladesh, something like that. The most agreed upon reason is because creator George Lucas just liked it better. I personally think it's a combo of all three. Still, it's so random to just change a full planet's name with no context. We have another name change in a totally separate galaxy now. We're going from Star Wars to Star Trek. This retcon is a pretty harmless one in comparison to everything else. In the episode Where No Man Has Gone Before, Captain Kirk is shown his future tombstone that very clearly reads James R. Kirk. However, this is not the name we know today. His name is Captain James T. Kirk, the T standing for Tiberius. It was odd as there was never really an official in-universe reason for the change. Out of universe, we know that even though some characters in Star Trek aren't human, the writers are, which means that they sometimes forget things. There is also the fact that the headstone was in the live-action 1966 show, and the middle name was mentioned in the animated series in 1974. That's quite a jump. The name does have a funny origin. Writer David Gerrold was at the Star Trek convention and was asked what the T stands for. He pulled it from a book he happened to be reading at the time and jokingly said Tiberius. Needless to say, it stuck. In the novels, we learn that Kirk actually picked the name himself, so maybe he just hated his name and wanted a different one. With 4 origin stories to choose from, it's no wonder the Phantom Stranger has some messy retcons in his history. Just who he is just seems to depend on whoever is holding the pen. The New 52 series is the latest comic set to flip everything around for this character and is now considered the canon. The pre-New 52 origin was that Phantom Stranger was a fallen angel. When Lucifer attacked heaven, the Phantom did not take a side, and as a punishment for that, he was sent to Earth to be alone forever. The post-52 origin is that he is Judas. That's right, the one that betrayed Jesus. Judas was tried and convicted of betraying Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. He was found guilty, didn't see that coming, and his punishment was to wander Earth forever, specifically to see the toll greed takes on man. He is now considered part of the Trinity of Sin, a club made up of him, Question, and Pandora, the one with the box. The 90s for comic books seems to be a lot thrown at the wall to see what sticks. Some of it was amazing, but in the case of Amazing Spider-Man 365, it doesn't always work out. In this issue, the web-slinger's parents are revived from the dead. There was basically nothing even hinting at this, plus Peter's parents had been dead for decades, so truly out to left field here. It wasn't until about 2 years later that we have been tricked. Turns out these weren't actually Peter's parents, but robots sent by Chameleon. They were designed with the intention of getting Peter to trust them and reveal Spider-Man's identity. He chose Peter because Peter takes all the best pictures of Spider-Man, so there must be a connection. He was right. The parent robots were equipped with the memories of his actual parents as well as the ability to simulate human emotion. The memories, paired with the emotional simulation, actually made the robot mom feel genuine love towards Peter and ended up saving his life and identity, and Peter had to watch his parents die a second time. Wolverine is good at a lot of things, especially coming back from the dead. He has everything going for him to not die: indestructible skeleton, remarkable healing factor, but sometimes even that isn't enough. But Wolverine is a fan favorite, you can't kill him. So how is it that he never seems to stay 6 feet under? Well, he travels 6 million feet under and fights the Angel of Death in Purgatory for the right to come back to life. Do you think any other hero does this? Did Silver Fox do this and that's why she came back? I'll never know, and that's okay. This new info came about in 2008 in Wolverine 48, and it was expanded on in Wolverine 58. The issue previous ends with Wolverine brain dead after a fight that ended up with a bomb on the inside of his body, and his girlfriend Amir passing on. Her passing emotionally destroyed him and his will to live, so when the time came to fight again, Wolverine didn't want to, which is why he wasn't waking up on Earth. Eventually though, a series of deaths and deals, Wolverine has clawed his way back to the surface. The X-Force series is known for bringing the original X-Men back together, but it almost looked very different. Jean Grey famously sacrificed herself to stop the Dark Phoenix from returning, and the plan was for her to stay dead. Of course, that didn't happen, and she made a triumphant return in 1985. Her place on the Super Squad originally belonged to a totally different mutant, Dazzler. Dazzler was a result of a partnership with a popular record label. She debuted in Uncanny X-Men, moved on to her own series, and then right as that was ending, she was supposed to join the X-Force. The final panel in her series was Beast asking her to join the team. There were even mock-ups drawn hinting at the fact that Dazzler was going to join the X-Men. But soon, the disco craze ended and Dazzler wasn't as popular as she used to be. The new X-Force comic needed a big female name, and eventually the writers landed on revived Jean Grey. This led to a pretty major retcon. She wasn't dead. A version of her did die, but the real woman was at the bottom of New York's Jamaica Bay. She was preserved by the Dark Phoenix so it would always have a host. This retcon changed the rep of other beloved characters as well. Cyclops' reputation was tarnished as he coldly abandoned his new wife and child to rejoin the X-Men, something many fans to this day do not appreciate. We are back in the 90s, this time with one of my favorite heroes, Iron Man, or well, the version of him I'd like to forget. It's in Avengers The Crossing issues that we find out Tony Stark has been under the control of supervillain Kang the Conqueror for years. He has been working at slowly deteriorating the lives of the Avengers. For example, he was the reason that Wasp's finances were destroyed. He also obliterated Quicksilver's nanny. The only person who can defeat Iron Man is Iron Man, so the Avengers do the reasonable thing and travel back in time to get a not yet corrupted teen Tony. That's how long Tony had been under Kang's influence. Evil Tony realizes the error of his ways and sacrifices himself to save the day. Now young Tony is the only Tony for a little while, and guess what? That whole Kang controlling thing also retconned. It wasn't Kang, but instead a totally different guy named Immortus.
This retcon is about Damian Wayne and his origin. Although I like Damian Wayne, I do dislike the way he was written into existence, especially when we had a perfectly good explanation for him before the retconned origin or his birth, or really straight up creation, really is what it was. Before Damian Wayne's origin was explored officially in the comic book continuity, Batman and Talia had actually already conceived a child together. One that was kind of intended to be Damian, but you know. At least that's what was implied in this story, Batman, son of the demon. In this story, Talia and Bruce come together because they kinda love one another and even are considered married when this happens. Their passion results in Talia conceiving a child who is hinted to have been given up for adoption at the end of the story, without Bruce seemingly knowing of this child's existence. However, this story, after being written by Mike W. Barr, was at the time not considered to be canon. I believe, but I'm not 100% sure, that DC had decided against it being canon after the fact. I'm not 100% sure on that though, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong there. Later though, in 2006, they had a change of heart and they actually wanted to see it modernized and incorporated into the main canon. And I thought, great, that sounds awesome. And Grant Morrison, who was writing Batman at the time, was tasked with this. I like Grant Morrison. However, while Damian was initially the natural born product of love in the original story, given up by Talia, possibly in the hopes that her child would have a better life, perhaps, I don't really know. In the 2006 version, Talia forces herself on Bruce and Damian is a test tube baby that she keeps in secret from Batman, only to drop young Damian on Batman's doorstep 8 years later after he was born. Yeah, a very different take on that story. A lot darker and a lot more like, what? I don't know what's worse for this retcon, Cassandra Cain being evil or the retcon explaining how she was only evil because Deathstroke had brainwashed her using a substance that was only triggered by self-doubt he had helped to build inside her, thereby turning her evil. Say what? This all went down during, you guessed it, the New 52, where Cassandra's Batgirl book disappeared and in its place we got an evil Cassandra Cain who popped up in Robin. The retcon of this retcon, which honestly is also pretty awful in its own right, even though it's trying to undo something that's also really terrible, was from Titans. In case you want to go back and relive any of this magic. Oh, New 52, New 52. You know, to be honest, this one isn't all New 52's fault. I've always found Black Canary's origins to be a bit confusing, because she is either Dinah the Black Canary, daughter of Dinah, Black Canary, or she is Dinah, who killed a demon and was abandoned by her parents at a young age as her origin was randomly changed during the New 52 continuity, only to be once again changed to a combination of these two origins. Canary, you're making me want to cry. I have honestly mixed feelings about this next one, but I know it's a controversial retcon in comic book history, which is why I'm including it here. We're talking about the explanation for Hal Jordan's unhinged villainous turn as being explained by him being possessed by a fear entity, Parallax. The reason a lot of folks dislike this one is because they feel it actually takes away from the very real turmoil Hal was dealing with at the time, and undermines the trauma his character experiences. It also gives Hal a scapegoat for everything he does while under Parallax's evil influence, which, you know, I feel like you kinda need, but at the same time, would it be more interesting if it was just Hal and then he had to deal with all that stuff? Maybe. Another retcon that bothers me in terms of the way it was done is this next one, Jason Todd coming back to life. Now here's the thing, I like Jason Todd, I don't mind him returning from the dead and coming back and being Red Hood, all of that actually is pretty cool to me. But what I do mind is the idea of Jason coming back to life only really because Superboy Prime punched him back into existence. What am I talking about? Well, Superboy Prime was trapped in a prison constructed out of basically the Source Wall. The Source Wall in DC Comics, for those that don't know, is basically like the fabric of the universe and reality. It's physical and tangible, but also it's all of reality, so just try to figure that out in your mind. That's what it is. And while Superboy Prime was locked away in this prison, he decided to punch it in a rage. His punch was so powerful that he caused a ripple effect, with his punch extending across reality and altering things across time. One of these things making it so Jason Todd never really died, apparently. Well, he did die. He died for 6 months, but then he miraculously woke up in his coffin thanks to this punch. What a weird excuse for strange retcons DC wanted to make. If you've heard me talk about New 52 on this channel, you know I have a lot of feelings about it. I got a lot of complicated feelings. And specifically, one of the characters I feel mixed up about is Wonder Woman. Not just her either during the New 52 era and how she was depicted, which is honestly less of an issue to me, I think, but more how the Amazons were depicted and how Wonder Woman's origin was changed. That I feel feelings about. There are so many retcons that I have from the world of Batman that make me frustrated, and this is another one of them. It pertains to two beloved Batman characters. Spoiler, who for a time was also Robin, Stephanie Brown, and Batman's friend and ally, Dr. Leslie Tompkins. During War Games, Stephanie Brown ends up getting captured by Black Mask and ultimately is tormented by him before later dying from injuries caused by that torment in an interrogation session. Initially, Batman blames himself for this, having fired her as his Robin and also not getting her to medical care in time. But later in the follow-up story, Leslie is revealed to be the villain in that regard, with it being revealed that she allowed Stephanie to die to teach Batman a lesson about running around irresponsibly with kid sidekicks. I'm sorry, what? And it gets worse. Later still, it would be revealed that Leslie actually hadn't done this, but had swapped out Stephanie with a similar looking cadaver and faked Stephanie's death, instead to teach Batman just teach him a lesson. I don't know what's worse, but neither of these is a good look for Leslie. And also, it really messed with just Stephanie as well. When John Kent first came into the comics, we got to have some quality time with him as an infant and a kid and see him grow up, and it was super cute. It was super cool getting to see Superman and Lois as parents. During this time, he got to know Batman's also relatively new to the comics son, Damian Wayne, and while initially these two didn't get along, they actually became really good friends over time. When they started getting to know each other, they were around the same age, but this changed when John went off to space. During this time, John would age up because space travel, and when he returned to Earth, he'd be a teenager while Damian was still just a kid, putting a wedge between their previously established close bond, as now they were at different places in their lives. While they used to have a stronger connection, they are still friends, but both are at very different points, like I said, in their lives, so there's not a lot for them to relate to. With this retcon, gone were the short-lived days of Super Sons, unfortunately. And I don't know if we'll ever get them back. Although a lot of people have been talking online about how are we gonna reverse that. I don't think we're gonna reverse that, but I like the optimism. Ick, ick, ick. That's all I have to say about this next retcon. It's so gross. Ugh. For a long time, it was one of the reasons I couldn't bring myself to appreciate Dick Grayson as Nightwing or as Robin. This story ruined his character for me, and it honestly took a while before I was ready to forgive him. I can't even comprehend how Babs ever was feeling. That's right, we're talking about the flashback during a stroll down memory lane where it was established in a Nightwing annual that Nightwing had cheated on his then fiancée, Starfire, with Barbara Gordon, after he'd gotten back from some space adventures. What's worse, he had actually come to check on Babs, but also to invite her to his and Starfire's wedding when they accidentally fell into bed together. Yikes. So you may have figured this out already at this point in this video, or if you know me, Amanda, you may have already figured it out a long time ago. When it comes to my thoughts on continuity resets, you may be thinking it's strange that while Amanda has talked about some of the changes made in New 52, she hasn't talked about the massive retcon as a whole. Well, my friends, I've been saving that sweet little nugget just for you. Ew, I can't believe I just said that. I'm sorry. Sweet little nugget. Anyways, yes, if you know me, you know one of my biggest complaints in regards to DC versus Marvel, let's say, is that I find the continuity at DC to be, at best, challenging to navigate. At worst, a complete freaking mess. Most days, I'd say, It's a mess, if you asked me, and a huge part of that is due to continuity resets. What is a continuity reset? Well, let's take New 52 for example. This one happened when we shifted continuities entirely, in essence resetting everything at day 0. Except, not really, because some series continued and were allowed to finish, bleeding into this restart point, making it even worse. And DC is very proud of its legacy numbering, so there are certain series like Batman and Detective Comics that have kind of mainly continued with their numbering, and Detective Comics I believe is now in the thousands in terms of issue numbering. I didn't mind all of the decisions necessarily that were made for characters during New 52, but that even for me is a mixed bag. What I did mind was just the idea of giving us a clean slate, because some characters had completely new origins, some characters had their old origins, some characters had some sort of combo weird thing happening. Now, when I talk about comics from before New 52, I have to specify that these are stories from the previous main continuity known as New Earth, and for fans of that era of comics, it technically means that their favorite canon stories aren't really exactly canon anymore. I mean, how weird is that?
Starting with Avengers 1 Million. Introduced in Marvel Legacy number 1 over 1 million years ago, the early human mutant known as Firehair became the avatar of the Phoenix Force and nearly destroyed the entire planet. Now, realizing that that's bad, and that she wasn't the only one capable of that level of power, she began assembling a team of supernatural and mystical beings to protect humanity and Earth. The eventual team was made up of the Asgardian god Odin Bor's son, the demigod sorcerer Agamotto, the Black Panther of the Panther Tribe, the woolly mammoth riding Ghost Rider, Iron Fist fan Faye, and a super smart caveman who wielded the Star Brand, which made him look surprisingly like the Hulk, but red. Now, after fighting some corrupted Celestials as well as time-traveling villains from the present like Thanos, multiple Doctor Dooms, and Mephisto, the team eventually disbanded. Now, I personally think it's really awesome. Like, the concept is just super cool. The only problem is that given the actual history of the Earth, and the history of some of the characters involved, and a whole bunch of things, actually it doesn't really make any sense. But whatever, man, there's a Ghost Rider riding a woolly mammoth. Sign me up, I'm there. But moving on, 2019's House of X number 2 revealed that Moira McTaggart had been a completely detectable mutant all along and had lived numerous lives already. This was because Moira's newly revealed mutant power was reincarnation, sort of. Basically, when Moira died, her consciousness would reincarnate in the past when she was still in her mother's tummy, thus allowing her to retain all of the memories of all of her different previous lives, but allowing her to modify the course of her life as she wished with all the prior information about how things went last time. So through this power, Moira had a total of 10 lives. While she was at the beginning a super loving and caring person, over time and over the course of her different lives, she began to hate mutants and began hating her own powers, which led her to try and create a mutant cure during the 3rd life. She tried to change her ways in the 4th, 5th, and 6th lives, but then got fed up and tried to take out the Trask bloodline in her 7th life. She then tried helping Magneto and Apocalypse in her 8th and 9th lives, and then in her 10th life, she pretended to be loving and caring while secretly plotting to depower the entire mutant population. While all of that ranks among the absolutely biggest twists in Marvel Comics history, Moira's ultimate goal also completely shifted from saving and helping mutants to destroying them entirely after Mystique and Destiny stripped her of her mutant powers, and she came back for an 11th time as a cyborg allying herself with Orchis during the fall of X. Next up, Robert Reynolds, or as I like to call him, Bob, was granted the power of 1,000,000 exploding suns after consuming the Golden Sentry Serum, which was an offshoot of the original Super Soldier Serum, except like 100,000 times more powerful. He used his powers for the greater good of all and put together a costume to make his debut as the Sentry. He was the example of what a hero should be. He had connections to Iron Man, was active during the years just prior to Fantastic Four's emergence. He became a role model for Spider-Man as well as an ally to the X-Men and equal to Reed Richards and a friend to the Hulk. The Sentry battled alongside the Fantastic Four and defeated his greatest enemy, the General, with the help of the X-Men. Except we had actually never seen the Sentry in Marvel Comics till Sentry number 1 in July of 2000. That's because of Sentry's darker half, the Void, one of the most evil and destructive forces in the universe. The existence of the Void drove Sentry to team up with Doctor Strange and Reed Richards
to erase the memory of Sentry from themselves and even the entire world. So really, Sentry had been around since before any of our favorite heroes had ever debuted. It actually worked really well, which we can't say of all the retcons on this list. For example, next up we are talking about the awful couple of Hawkeye and Mockingbird. This whole relationship honestly sort of seems like a cheap way of capitalizing on the Green Arrow and Black Canary coupling that DC had going on, but these two were nowhere near as compatible as their DC counterparts. The best example of that would be the whole thing surrounding a guy called Phantom Rider. To sum it all up, Mockingbird is caught and physically mistreated by the Phantom Rider, and so in turn, she eventually gets her revenge, taking the Rider's life. Now Hawkeye, instead of supporting his traumatized partner, is scared off by the fact that she took the life of her assailant, and he dumps her. Now while that really makes no sense considering Hawkeye's colorful past and the fact that she took the life of someone who did something absolutely horrible to her, it all got retconned. Now the story changed so that Mockingbird actually consented to do the jiggy with Phantom Rider, which means she then took his life for seemingly no reason at all. On top of that though, instead of leaving it so that Hawkeye dumping her for taking a life for no reason makes a bit more sense, Hawkeye now just used the passing of Phantom Rider as the excuse to break up with her when the real reason was because she had actually cheated. Now look, they didn't talk about this next point in part 1, and this story will forever haunt my psyche. So next up is the Spider-Man story, Sin's Past. This story contains within its strange pages the revelation that Gwen Stacy, former lover and a teenager, was having an ongoing affair with Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, a very creepy full-grown man, old enough to be her father. Not only was she having the affair, it even resulted with Gwen secretly giving birth to twins. Twins that Gwen threatened to keep from Norman, which became the new reason that Green Goblin tried to take her out. Twins that were half Green Goblin and grew up at a faster rate, and twins that became a pair of assassins and came to New York to attack Spider-Man. I do not recommend reading this story at all, because all you will be able to see when you close your eyes at night going forward is the incredibly creepy image of Norman and his Green Goblin face as he's laying on top of Gwen Stacy. But on to brighter and better things. Jean Grey's death in the Dark Phoenix saga remains among the most shocking passings in Marvel Comics history. Her sacrifice remains an unforgettable moment for many fans, despite the fact that Fantastic Four number 286 retconned it out of existence. Issue 286 established that instead of the Phoenix Force becoming one with Jean Grey and influencing her decisions throughout the Phoenix and Dark Phoenix sagas, it turns out that the Jean Grey we saw wasn't Jean Grey at all, but was instead the Phoenix Force itself impersonating Jean Grey. The Jean Grey we all knew and loved was actually in stasis, in a cocoon, by the Phoenix Force at the bottom of Jamaica Bay, which is where her space shuttle crashed Uncanny X-Men number 101, and where she was reborn into the Phoenix originally. This brought the fan favorite character back to life, but devalued a large amount of the significance of the whole Phoenix and Dark Phoenix sagas for fans, and it made people start to hate Jim Shooter, Marvel's editor-in-chief at the time. Next up is Hydra Cap. The Marvel story Secret Empire introduced the idea that Captain America, the beacon of hope and the one who always did the right thing, was secretly this whole time undercover Hydra super soldier. This Hydra Cap organized the second superhuman civil war as well as a Chitauri invasion on the Earth. He got promoted to director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and influenced the legislation of the S.H.I.E.L.D. Act, which gave S.H.I.E.L.D. way more authority. He then used that new power to basically organize a Hydra takeover of America itself. Steve Rogers revealed himself as not only a long-time Hydra defector, but the Hydra Supreme. He allied himself with a new Madam Hydra, took advantage of a global catastrophe to seize control over the world's governments, and helped Hydra make its move. Hydra, who had seriously infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. at the time, began assuming control of key locations and executing anyone who stood in their way. The reveal of Captain America as a longtime Hydra agent completely took readers by surprise and even a bit of anger. Marvel realized and even admitted to their mistake, and so the story got retconned to have it so that the character known as Cubic, who was essentially a living cosmic cube in the form of a child, was manipulated by Hydra to create a Captain America who grew up being loyal to Hydra. This Hydra Cap would eventually supplant the real Captain America of Earth 616 till the true Captain America came back and beat the snot out of him. Hydra Cap then became an actually really good villain, and Marvel has actually found a way to use the Hydra Cap again, with him recently returning under the guise of Captain Krakoa in the Fall of X storyline. But speaking of mutants, in Giant Size X-Men number 1, Charles Xavier puts together a brand new team thanks to the fact that his original original X group was being held captive by the living island Krakoa. However, we later learned that this new team wasn't the only one, cause Professor X already sent another new squad of X-Men to save his original team, and they were all horribly killed. X-Men Deadly Genesis revealed that Professor X had put together a backup team of X-Men made up of Sway, Darwin, Petra, and the newly revealed and teased at third Summers brother, Vulcan. This new team all seemed to perish at the hands of Krakoa, and rather than admit to his poor decision making that got a bunch of mutants AIA and taking responsibility for it all, Charles Xavier instead just erased the minds of everyone who knew about this team, including wiping the entire memory of Vulcan from his older brother Cyclops' memory. Xavier then put together a new X-Men team that debuted in 1974's Giant Size X-Men #1. As it was, this whole thing came back to bite Xavier in the butt big way when it turned out that Vulcan hadn't actually passed away at all. Now, sticking with the X-Men and mutants, the Mutant Massacre storyline was one of the biggest X-Men storylines of the 80s. This crossover involved evil marauders slaughtering hundreds of sewer-dwelling mutants known as Morlocks before finally being defeated by the X-Men. It's not really a complicated story, but Marvel added new layers to Mutant Massacre by retroactively inserting several characters into the story who hadn't been conceived of by Marvel creators at the time the story came out. Basically, readers would learn that the Mutant Massacre was orchestrated by Mr. Sinister because many of the Morlocks were created by his rival, Dark Beast. Sinister felt his own work was being perverted by Dark Beast, and more than that, it was revealed that Gambit was hired to lead the Marauders straight to their prey. Despite his remorse though, that revelation severely damaged Gambit's reputation as an X-Man. And last up for today, for the longest time, Bucky Barnes was one of the few comic book characters that it appeared would actually remain deceased alongside Captain Marvel of the Kree. Initially believed to have perished on a mission alongside Captain America, crashing while on an experimental rocket while Cap himself went plunging into the depths and got frozen into a popsicle with a squishy center. But Bucky was in actuality captured and subjected to intense brainwashing by the USSR. When Marvel relaunched the Captain Marvel comics in 2004 under Ed Brubaker and Steve Epting, they brought in the Winter Soldier, one of the deadliest assassins in the Marvel Universe, capable of going toe-to-toe with Captain America himself. And it wasn't long before Cap came to the horrified realization that his new enemy was none other than his former sidekick. Bucky's time as a ruthless brainwashed assassin was colored by dark deeds and pretty chilling action. He came into contact with tons of characters like Nick Fury or Black Widow, who he helped train, and he even ended the life of Wolverine's wife, Itsu. This dark past would haunt him for a very long time after he returned to the side of the heroes. Now, while Bucky has rejoined the ranks of heroes, the shadow of his time as the Winter Soldier just continues to cast a long, pretty haunting presence over his character.
As many of you probably know, Marvel seems to love doing this thing where they make you believe a character is a mutant for a very long time and then one day just randomly establish that they aren't and that they never were. Almost every time this happens, people hate it. Wolverine's Lupine era is another great example. Wolverine has been around forever and has been a mutant basically for as long as we've had him. That all changed in 2007 around issue 50 of Wolverine Volume 3. Well, for a little while there, Wolverine was a lupine, a human descended from wolves. Wolverine was told this by ancient evil Romulus and didn't take it well. I guess the good news is neither did fans. This retcon was received so poorly, Marvel did a double retcon to essentially fix it. In the later comic Wolverine Volume 2 number 312, Romulus' sister Remus ends up literally telling Wolverine that everything her brother said wasn't true and the lupine species was not actually real. Well, that takes care of that, I guess.
Next up, chaos magic. What is it, and was it ever real? After we learned that Wanda was tied to Chthon, over time the magic she used was also tied to him and her connection to the demonic powerhouse as a god. As the god of chaos, one of the titles that Chthon claims to have, this magic type became known as chaos magic. But there was also the issue of Wanda's initial origin. Wanda was first introduced as the Scarlet Witch back in X-Men, where she was teamed up with the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. She was an evil mutant who had an unpredictable hex-based power set, often bringing bad luck to her opponents whenever she used her abilities, though not as in control of them as we now know her to be. She usually couldn't pick exactly what would happen, she'd just like hex people and something bad would happen. So, which was she? Was she mutant or was she magic? Or was she some combo of these two things? That's kind of what chaos magic was considered to be for a while, a sort of combo of those two things, until Avengers Disassembled, when it was then established by Doctor Strange that chaos chaos magic was no longer real. In fact, according to Strange, it never had been real. This was the reason he couldn't help Wanda or the Avengers during Avengers Disassembled or House of M. However, later still, chaos magic was then re-retconned back into existence as Wanda, now no longer considered a mutant, needed an exploration for her natural magical aptitude. Not only that, but chaos magic was then considered to be the oldest form of magic in all of existence, apparently, predating even Chthon. And apparently this is also sometimes why Doctor Strange didn't know about it, because it's so old, but you'd think as the Sorcerer Supreme, you would know that. Chthon apparently didn't create this magic, he simply used it, because that's how old it was. Wanda's link to Chthon, chaos magic, and the mystic arts through her family lineage were used to explain her innate power, especially because she's not a mutant, so whatever.
Poor Zorn was a victim of identity theft, but then not actually. Turns out he was the one committing identity fraud? We see Zorn for the first time in New X-Men Annual 2001 as Zorn, but it was all revealed at the end. Zorn was actually a vengeful Magneto using the Zorn identity to get closer to the X-Men. Turns out it was actually Zorn pretending to be Magneto, pretending to be Zorn, and Zorn was being controlled by someone named Sublime to foster mutant hatred in the world. So that's fun. At the end of the final battle, Zorn dies but then comes back because his essence was still connected to Sublime. Eventually though, he did disappear and his twin brother came to take over his place in the X-Men. He had all Zorn's powers and even had a mask like his. Marvel editors just really liked the character of Zorn and wanted him around permanently, whereas Marvel in general wanted Magneto back. It worked out well for everyone, well, except the storyline that Zorn originated in. Throughout it, there were hints everywhere that Zorn was actually Magneto, as that was always the intention. I guess they just mean nothing now.
Speaking of weird characters that we thought we know who they were, but then it turned out maybe we didn't know. Did you know that Spider-Man has a sister? Yep, he does. Well, sort of. I actually don't mind Spider-Man having a secret sister in the comics, that's not what I'm upset about here, and that being a big reveal. But what I did not like about this one was the fact that it wasn't super consistent, kinda like Zorn. It was like Marvel was afraid to fully commit, so near the end of this adventure with his supposed sister Teresa, it's implied that she might not actually be a sister at all, and that her origins are as of yet unconfirmed in that regard. But either way, Peter still confirms that he considers her his family regardless. Keeping it ambiguous is not my favorite when it comes to comic book family history, especially as someone that needs to keep track of that stuff.
Franklin Richards, son to Mr. Fantastic and the Invisible Woman, has been having a bit of an identity crisis lately. First, he is a mutant and invited to Krakoa to be with the other mutants. Then he can't use the portal because he is not showing to be a mutant. Then we learn his dad, Mr. Fantastic, has made a device that masks his mutant gene, so eventually Franklin does end up on the island and he is a mutant again. But then, much later, after a big battle, he tries to come back, but he can't because he's not a mutant. It's hard enough to keep up with as a reader. Imagine that being your teenage years. Franklin is, or was, considered one of the strongest mutants ever, but if he uses his powers too much, it gets drained. Well, he did that, and his dad was trying to figure out what was wrong. When the X-Men extended Franklin's invite to the island, the Fantastics were thrilled, and they thought Franklin was too young to be leaving his family. There's a big fight in Washington Square between the Fantastic Four and X-Men over this kid, and it ends up being for nothing because he's not actually a mutant after all. Apparently, Franklin's powers were so strong that he unknowingly used them to make himself appear as a mutant, but when his powers are drained, he can't do that anymore, revealing his true nature. All that family and coworker drama and heartache for nothing.
This has to be one of the weirdest retcons here. There are a lot of weird ones in relation to House of M that happen in retrospect and which would have changed the perspective entirely of this event, but this one really gives almost all of them a run for their money. Well, it's a tie between this one and one other one on our list, but I'm gonna talk about that one later. This one went down in Children's Crusade, where Billy finds his spiritual mother Wanda in Latveria, where Scarlet Witch claims that she is head over heels in love with Dr. Doom, and is even betrothed to marry him. What? Another interesting point Billy learns is that Wanda seems to be suffering from amnesia here. Turns out that this was all seemingly part of a plot of Doom's to steal Wanda's power. However, it is also implied that the two did really have feelings for each other, despite Doom's claims that it was all a fervent sham, and that Wanda means nothing to him. In his anger, he even claims that she is so worthless, she wasn't even the true cause of House of M, and that it all actually happened due to his own machinations. That's right, he marches in there saying House of M was all me, baby. Interesting. I generally write this one off as Doom just being frustrated at the result of his plan not going to plan, as we still have yet to see any proof of Victor's claim here, I believe, but it is possible that this was meant to be taken literally and it was a retcon that was intended to absolve Wanda of her guilt, but at the same time it also would kind of make much of the event feel hollow because Wanda was pushed to her actions due to her own trauma and hurt at that time, so it makes sense that she's behind House of M, and while I'm not condoning what she did, it did make sense for her character to lash out like she did, hence why Doom being behind it all really makes no sense.
No matter which universe you look at, Iron Man is suffering. That's just the way of the worlds. In 2012's Iron Man 17, Tony gets some pretty serious news. Turns out he was adopted, and he already has enough daddy issues, but the revelation that has caused him to reevaluate his bond with his father, it didn't go over well. Maybe Howard wasn't the best dad to Tony because he secretly resented him for not being his biological son. The Starks' biological son was Arno, and he wasn't doing so well, so the Starks turned to Alien 451. The alien helped get Arno to term, but modified him in the process to wield the universe's most powerful suit of armor. That sounds familiar. The baby was born, but Howard had done some modifying of his own that made the baby's health decline. Who knows what would happen if 451 found out what Howard did, so the Starks needed a cover. Enter Tony. This is so sad. Tony was literally being adopted in a family not to be loved, but to be a decoy that is forced to live up to unattainable standards for his entire life. Eventually, Tony met 451 and tried and failed to pilot the armor. When he got back down to Earth, the ever-curious Tony looked into why he couldn't do it and found a tape in which Howard explained everything. Marvel, give Tony a break challenge level impossible.
What's interesting about a lot of retcons is that they are usually implemented by writers or creative teams who are different from the ones who established the initial canon for a character, which honestly makes sense. These are new creatives who either might not be aware of the established canon, might not like it, or might just want to change it up because they want to shake things up and have like a new vision for a character or just established lore. But this isn't always the case. Like with Genesis and her alter ego, the demonic entity Annihilation, during Ten of Swords. Genesis was revealed to be the retcon wife of Apocalypse, who also happened to be the one under the Mask of Annihilation or the Helm of Annihilation, possessed by the demonic Amenthi entity. However, by the end of Ten of Swords, we'd actually saved Genesis from her possession, with Saturnine transforming the Helm of Annihilation into a staff. The whole purpose of Saturnine doing this was to zap Annihilation's power somewhat, making it easier for the wielder to dominate and control this power instead of Annihilation possessing the wielder. This way, Genesis and the Iraqi mutants would have complete control over the Amenthi army without being possessed. But apparently, this was not actually what happened. In X-Men Red, issue number 12, Genesis is once more under the influence of Annihilation. Again, even though we just did this a few years ago, who while unable to possess her, is considered to be more of a corrupting force now than ever before, apparently, in staff form. What's worse is this time Apocalypse also wasn't able to stop Genesis by defeating her in one-on-one combat, so Genesis seeks to conquer and invade Arakko. And Apocalypse, while warning and preparing Arakko, says that he's actually got to take a back seat for this one because he already lost in one-on-one combat, so therefore he can't fight again. Apparently that's a thing he does now.
We are back with my favorite, Tony Stark. It's time for his villain era, literally. Turns out for a while there in the 90s, Tony was under the control of Kang the Conqueror. This all comes to light in Avengers: The Crossing. We don't actually know how long Tony has been under someone's control, but he's been deteriorating the lives of the Avengers for a while, causing financial instability and even going so far as offing people close to his teammates. It's definitely not a look we want to see for the Avenger. When he gets discovered by the other Avengers, there is of course a battle, but Iron Man is hard to beat. What do the Avengers do? They travel back in time and they get another Tony. Teenage Tony inspires evil Tony to become good again, and evil Tony sacrifices himself to save the day, becoming a hero again. This retcon already messed with Tony's character, but now it means that Tony is just really young for a while, until it's eventually, thankfully, fixed when all the Avengers died and then were revived by someone we have already seen, Mr. Franklin Richards, but specifically the version of him that Franklin knew best, meaning older Tony, but he's a good guy again. Most fans dislike this retcon for what it did to Iron Man, but it was also just confusing. Later on, Kang even confirmed that he was just trying to create confusion. Mission accomplished, dude.
Speaking of things that are confusing, especially in the modern light of day, this is the retcon that is tied for worst in the wake of the House of M aftermath. If you know me, you can guess what I'm about to say next. Say it with me. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver are no longer mutants. What? Why? And how? Yes, because of the MCU, and because the High Evolutionary is basically a major creep who likes to experiment on mutant younglings, I don't know. This retcon took place during the Axis event, which I have honestly mixed feelings about. The event, not the retcon. While there are parts of Axis that I like, this is decidedly one of the parts that makes me question if it might actually be the worst event ever, because that is how much this retcon bothers me. It's not so much about losing Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch from the mutant group, although that does sting quite a bit, but it's about how this retcon made years of established family drama pointless. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver were proven as not being mutants when we learned they weren't actually Magneto's kids after Wanda attempted to put a curse on her direct family. While Pietro was affected by this, Magneto was not. The good news is that during the Krakoan era, Magneto firmly established that he still thought of the twins, Wanda especially, as his children. Even though they weren't actually his kids by birth, they would always be considered a part of the Maximoff family tree. It's a nice gesture, but I still desperately want this retcon to be undone. Please, Marvel, please answer my pleas.
Number 10. Martian Manhunter and Fire. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I am also not the biggest fan of fire either, and I would absolutely hate being set on fire for so many reasons. But for such a powerful hero who can shapeshift at a molecular level, change his entire genetic makeup to let him pass through solid objects, withstand ferocious attacks, or bend light waves around his body, it just seems a little silly, right? Not to mention that he comes from Mars, otherwise known as the Red Planet or the Fire Star. So why is this one of his biggest weaknesses? Well, long before Martian Manhunter even existed, a race of aliens known as the Burning caused some serious damage with fire in order to create their offspring, which, needless to say, people weren't too happy about. After the Guardians of the Universe separated the offspring into the White Martians and the Green Martians, they were all imbued with a congenital pyrophobia, aka a fear of fire. So it kind of makes sense why he's so afraid of it. Not only does it physically hurt him, but it also scrambles his most prized weapon of all, his mind. This fear and weakness is so intense that when he's exposed to flame, he has the capacity to self-destruct, either combusting into bits or dissolving into rivers of Martian liquid. Want to know more about the Martian Manhunter? Well then check him out in his first appearance in 1986's Justice League of America number 255. Number 9. The Flash and being too fast. At first, I've gotta say this one confused me so much because that's kind of the Flash's whole thing, right? Well, when it comes to Barry Allen, his speed might be his greatest strength, but being too fast puts his life in mortal danger. In Crisis on Infinite Earths, we see the Flash use his super speed to thwart the Anti-Monitor's evil plan, but the speed vortex he creates to stop the villain's antimatter cannon from firing is so fast that it sweeps the Flash away along with it. He ends up being stranded for 23 years in the Speed Force, you know, that mystical energy field that gives all the speedsters their powers, and spends that whole time running and trying to figure out how to get back. Basically, what happened is that Barry ran way too fast for his body to handle and he atomized himself. Thought to be dead by his closest friends, including Wally West, who took up the Flash mantle in his absence, Barry's apparent death was a huge shock for everyone, and also entirely his own fault. Check out more of the Flash for yourself, starting with his first appearance in 1956's Showcase, number 4. Number 8. Power Girl and Raw Materials. You'd think that being weak to kryptonite would be their only weakness, considering how easy it seemed for people to get their hands on it. But Kara Zor-El from Earth 2 actually had another pretty big weakness at one point. They were vulnerable to unprocessed natural materials such as branches and rocks for a short while. This also includes stone, dirt, and sand. Basically anything that can be found on Earth that isn't man-made. In Peter David's Supergirl Volume 4 number 16, she gets knocked to the ground and impaled by a pretty big tree branch, which, in her defense, would put anyone on the ground. Supergirl helps yank out the branch, and with this weirdly sociopathic smile on her face, she asked, "What, are you vulnerable to wood?" It took a second, but after she was no longer in pain, she replied, "Worse, to any raw, unprocessed natural materials. So, sticks and stones really can break my bones." God, dumb joke and even dumber weakness. Check her out for yourself in her first appearance in 2011's Flashpoint Volume 2, number 5. Number 7. Adam Strange and Forced Deportation. Who knew that archaeologists could also be superheroes? Well, apparently Adam Strange did, because that is exactly what he is. He inadvertently found himself on the planet Ran and was gifted with all the powers of a superhero in Mystery in Space, and it's not exactly explained why. Sounds pretty great, right? I mean, what could possibly be his weakness? Well, it's not actually his fault or in his control. This life of bliss he lives on Ran is frequently interrupted by his rather inconvenient transportations back to Earth, where he has no powers at all. The technology responsible for bringing him to Ran, the Zeta Beam, only allows him to remain there for as long as it's transmitting back to Earth. And as it takes the beam a few good years to reach Strange's home planet, it's not exactly easy to catch a ride back. Strange might have been recruited as Rand's savior, but his timing issues really make this role more of a temporary gig. He could be midway through his heroics before vanishing without a single trace. He even left his wife to nearly get eaten by a tiger once. Luckily, as Alan Moore's Swamp Thing series clarified, the Randians are more than capable of looking after themselves when Strange isn't around, and thank goodness for that, because I wouldn't be relying on Strange much either. Give his story a read for yourself, starting with 1986's Outsiders, number 6. Number 6, Human Torch and Asbestos. Now, don't get me wrong, Johnny Storm, aka the Human Torch, is a force to be reckoned with. Not only can he create, absorb, and manipulate fire, which is pretty awesome on its own, but his Nova Flame is hot enough to vaporize the particles of anything in his way, whether it's a bullet, a building, a bad guy, etc. Interestingly enough though, his powers can't seem to penetrate asbestos. Now this doesn't seem like much of a weakness now, given that asbestos is now banned across most of the world, but back when the Human Torch was first created by Stan Lee and Ernest Hart in 1963, it was a much more common thing, as it was used to insulate pipes and wires, soundproof rooms, and even make cheap garden furniture. In Strange Tales number 111, Asbestos Man came into play, dialed up Johnny Storm, and arranged a showdown between the two. The Human Torch wasn't really all that into it, but he agreed nonetheless and showed up completely underprepared. Asbestos Man used his super asbestos suit, a fire retardant shield, and a fisherman's net to go toe-to-toe with the Human Torch, and he wreaked havoc on the Human Torch until he developed mesothelioma and needed an oxygen tank to stay alive. Moral of the story, kids, is always prepare for anything, and please, don't breathe asbestos. Check out more of the Human Torch's story, starting with 1961's Fantastic Four, number 1. Number 5, Wonder Woman and being tied up. Superheroes don't come much more kick than Wonder Woman. She's an extremely skilled warrior with enough power to take on the gods and win, and she's shown time and time again that she can hold her own in the world of comic book heroes. However, the Golden Age Wonder Woman was bound by an interesting Amazonian rule that really did not work in her favor. Known as Aphrodite's Law, it states that when an Amazon girl permits a man to chain her bracelets of submission together, she becomes weak as other women in a man-ruled world. This gender-specific weakness lasted from Wonder Woman's debut in 1942 right through to the mid-80s, when DC finally retconned this out for good. This weakness is less literal than metaphorical, meant to demonstrate Marston's argument that women are only vulnerable to men when they choose to be. But still, I am very glad that this was gotten rid of for good. Check out Wonder Woman more for yourself, starting with her first appearance in 1942's All-Star Comics, Volume 1, Number 8. Number 4, Gladiator and Self-Confidence. Cal-Arc, aka Gladiator, is arguably one of the most powerful comic book heroes ever, gifted with planet-shattering strength, super speed, heat vision, frost breath, and a few psionic abilities as well. He's a superhero anyone would love to be, however, even though he is loved, he never really learned to love himself, and that is sometimes his biggest downfall. Although low self-esteem isn't exactly fun for anyone, trust me, I know, for Gladiator it's actually a fatal weakness. His power fluctuates according to his confidence, as seen in Dan Abnett's and Andy Lanning's War of Kings crossover in 2009. Get him to doubt himself or even his abilities for 1 second and he can be defeated by opponents with far weaker abilities than him. A prime example of this is shown in War of Kings number 3 when Rocket Raccoon manages to convince Gladiator his gun will hurt himself and despite withstanding far worse in the past, succumbs to self-fulfilling prophecy and is beaten. Give his story a read for yourself, starting with 1977's X-Men number 107. Number 3, Daredevil and Loud Noises. Now we all likely know this, but Matt Murdock's loss of vision took away the natural gift of eyesight that we all take for granted, and replaced it with echolocation, an uncanny radar sense that allows him to basically see things through sound. Unfortunately for many heroes, their greatest strength can also be their greatest weakness, and such is the case for Daredevil, as his extreme sensitivity to sound can completely incapacitate him. In Daredevil Volume 2 West Case Scenario, he is subjected to a high decibel ultrasound, 120 decibels to be exact, by the dastardly Purple Man, who knows his weapon is excruciating for a man of Daredevil's gift. Daredevil's head spins and he looks like a man under a sorcerer's spell, leaving him completely vulnerable to a follow-up attack. The same can actually be done using intense smells as well, since his sense of smell was also heightened after losing his eyesight. Although Daredevil can and does go toe-to-toe with pretty much anyone in a fight, he will get utterly emasculated by a stink bomb or a supersonic sound. Check out more of Matt Murdock for yourself, starting with his first appearance in 1964's Daredevil number 1. Loud noises! Number 2, Green Lantern and Wood. If you're a bit confused, that is totally okay. This is not a weakness that is common across all of the Green Lanterns, it's specific to the very first Green Lantern, Alan Scott. Despite being armed with a magical ring and a spectrum of pretty much limitless powers, Scott seemed to have another fatal weakness other than the color yellow. He first realized that this might be a problem for him after he was hit in the face with a wooden log, and then after a series of wins and victory laps, Scott realized tree bark might be his potential undoing. Put a little more succinctly, items made of wood cannot be lifted or broken by energy from the ring, nor can barriers of emerald energy stop projectiles crafted from wood. Apparently this vulnerability to wood was because the green flame was an incarnation of green growing things, and thus could not be turned against them. Guess you could say he, can't get wood. Check out the first Green Lantern for yourself, starting with 1940s All-American Comics, number 16. Number 1. Captain Marvel Jr. and his own name. Poor Freddie Freeman. Out of all of the weaknesses on this list today, he probably drew the shortest straw because his weakness is his own name. If Captain Marvel Jr. tries to introduce himself to a superpowered ally, or for some reason feels the need to say his name in the middle of a battle, he'll instantly be transformed back into Freddie Freeman, a ordinary young lad who relies on a crutch to walk. Or if he speaks his superhero alias aloud in the guise of Freddie Freeman, he'll transform into a shimmering beacon of muscly justice and give himself away. Jerry Ordway tried getting around this flaw during Captain Marvel Jr.'s sporadic appearances in Teen Titans between 1995 and 1998 by having Freeman refer to himself as CM3, since he was one of the 3 members of the Captain Marvel family at the time. Also, he could avoid accidental transformations, but that change didn't really stick around. Honestly, for someone who inspired many of Elvis's onstage looks, that is one weakness that I don't know if I can overlook. Check him out for yourself in his first DC appearance in 1995's The Power of Shazam, number 3.
Number 10. Lack of imagination. Bobby is actually one of the most powerful mutants in the Marvel Universe, and yet people might not always think of him first when it comes to some of the most powerful mutants around. This could be because what often holds Robert Drake back is his own imagination. It turns out Iceman has actually been capable of accomplishing insane feats with his powers, which we've only begun to see in more recent years. He can create sentient ice golems and change not only his own form from ice to water, but others as well. So what has prevented him from doing this in the past? Apparently his lack of imagining that he could. This fact also makes me wonder if this is true for other mutants apart from Bobby. Could all mutants be a lot stronger if they were just a little bit more creative? And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button, and don't forget to turn on that bell notification so you don't miss out on any nerdy content. Number 9. Drying out. I'm so glad this is no longer a weakness. For a while there, Aquaman had to be submerged in water periodically, otherwise he would literally dry out. He would also get weaker the longer he was away from water, and of course could even die if he was permanently kept out of water for long enough. And I believe this started affecting him after like an hour of being out of water. Not a lot of time. Number 8. Bug spray. Yep, there have been times when Spider-Man was actually targeted and almost successfully defeated with, you guessed it, bug spray. Because he is a mutate, having had his genes in essence spliced with that of the radioactive spider who bit him, Spider-Man has both the strengths and in some cases the weaknesses of a spider. This not only includes a weakness to bug spray, but also a weakness to cold environments as well. In fact, if you used enough bug spray, you could even permanently defeat Peter Parker by ending his life. That's right, bug spray isn't just a nuisance for Spider-Man, it can actually be downright deadly. Ethyl chloride specifically is the substance that Spider-Man finds himself weakened by. When exposed to the substance, it weakens Spider-Man, draining him of his powers and threatening his very life. Number 7. Yellow. The color yellow has to be up there as one of the weirdest weaknesses that we have in comics. For a good long while, this was a weakness shared by all Green Lanterns, especially odd when you consider just how powerful Green Lanterns are considered to be. So why were they weakened by a color? Well, while definitely silly on paper, it actually has to do with the rich history of Green Lantern lore. Green Lantern's opposing emotional color, you see, was yellow, which represents fear in the world of the cosmic emotional spectrum. Because green represents willpower, of course, the only thing that could undermine their abilities would be the emotion of fear. This was also inherently built into the Lanterns, as well as the physical manifestation of fear. Parallax was trapped within the Green Lantern power battery, making this, in essence, a built-in weakness. One that would also serve to consume Hal Jordan, who would ultimately become corrupted by fear, and then later be possessed by Parallax as a result. Number 6. Hold your breath. This was once a weakness that ruled over Kitty Pryde, aka Catherine or Kate Pryde's mutant powers. Initially, Kate could only phase so long as she was holding her breath. which prevented her from phasing indefinitely. However, as time went on, Kate would learn how to manipulate the air in her lungs, which meant that she was eventually free from this weakness, making her a lot more OP today than she once was. Although in my heart, Kate has always been OP, even when she had to hold her breath. Number 5, wood. Does this weakness sound ridiculous to you? Because it certainly does to me. When you think of a superhero, you usually think of someone who is capable of defeating your common run-of-the-mill criminal in a single punch. We think of beings who can fly and shoot laser beams from their eyes, who are impervious to damage from even some of the most dramatic blows. And then there is the original Green Lantern, Alan Scott, with his weakness to wood. Why did Alan Scott initially have this weakness? Well, there have been a few reasons that have been used in an attempt to explain this. One is that as a lantern, he was simply only invulnerable to metals, so wood was just something that wasn't a thing he was invulnerable to. Another is related to a conflict with the previous Green Lantern who wielded the lantern and was an alien who misused his powers, and as such, Alan was simply punished as a result of that previous Green Lantern's folly, because he has his lantern. There was another reason that said the wood weakness came from the fact that the Green Lantern came from green glowing things, and as such couldn't or wouldn't be used to do harm to its own kind, which would be wood, trees, nature, that kind of thing. Another still was explained as Alan's own fear of being knocked in the back of the head with a wooden club, which happened on his first outing, and that was the reason why. It was like a built-in fear, he had to overcome it. But either way you slice it, the idea that an all-powerful being like Green Lantern could be defeated with a baseball bat, it's pretty silly, let's be real. Number 4, superpowers. Iska is a super interesting character. On one hand, she is extremely powerful and can never lose. She can even potentially have her power utilized to manipulate the stakes of other competitions that she is pulled into. However, this also implies that there are times when she has zero control over her powers, in the sense that she cannot influence the result of an unbalanced battle, or that she can be used to give someone else, a rival or even an enemy, the upper hand by including her in a wager or a fight. Her powers force whatever side she is on to become victorious, regardless of whether or not she even wants that to happen. This has meant that Iska has been forced to turn her back on her own people, the mutants of Morocco, more than once. She has also had to fight against family, colleagues, and friends before as a result. Which, I don't know, if you ask me, that kind of sounds like a weakness because you gotta live with that, so that would kind of suck. You always win, but at what cost? Number 3, organic materials. Power Girl probably has one of the weirdest weaknesses around in comics. Despite being a Kryptonian, and sometimes an Atlantean, depending on the time period and version of the character we're talking about, who is on the level of Superman when it comes to her powers and her strength, she can easily be harmed simply if you use organic materials to hurt her. You know that saying about sticks and stones may break your bones? Well, for Power Girl, despite having super durability, this is actually true. Sticks and stones could break her bones, but industrial steel probably wouldn't for some reason. Fortunately, Kara no longer has this weakness anymore, but for an embarrassing little while in the 90s, she did, so. Number 2, power inhibitors. Remy LeBeau often seems to be considered an underrated X-Men. He can create massive explosions using kinetic energy, which he focuses on an object that is charged by his touch and explodes. Typically prefers playing cards just because they're fast to charge, but he could charge really big stuff if he wanted to. He also has great control over his powers, but there is something you might have noticed in the comics when it comes to his power set. He never seems to charge people or any organic life forms. What's up with that? For many, they might just think that Gambit chooses not to because, well, he's ultimately a hero, although this rule isn't always consistently applied, as sometimes writers do forget about it. But if you were wondering why, for the most part, Gambit can't charge living beings, it's actually because of Mr. Sinister. Gambit made a deal with Sinister to operate on his brain in order to help him control his powers more, while also limiting them so that he doesn't basically go haywire and kill everyone he loves. This means his own weakness in regard to the use of his abilities is actually kind of self-imposed. Number 1, red kryptonite. Red kryptonite has to be one of the goofiest weaknesses to have ever existed in all of comic book history. I know that's a bold statement to some, but I honestly stand by it. Why is red kryptonite so dumb? Well, because it's completely unpredictable. It's like chaos incarnate when it comes to Superman weaknesses. This is because it was stated that each piece of red kryptonite had different effects. In fact, it was also suggested that after 24 to 48 hours of a particular effect taking hold, it would subside. But if exposed to the same piece of red kryptonite again, a Kryptonian would become victim to a whole different side effect for some reason. But then it has also been stated that once a Kryptonian is affected by a piece of red kryptonite, that whole piece is rendered powerless and can't be used against them ever again. Basically, red kryptonite is a bundle of contradictions, mainly used as a plot device to do whatever the writer needs to do to Superman for their story. List of side effects includes, but are not limited to, power loss, turning evil, excessive hair growth, blindness to all things green, insanity, and turning into a dragon.
Number 10. Batman's inability to trust. For a superhero with no powers, Batman is able to do remarkably well against much more powerful villains, and is able to stand next to some of the most powerful heroes in the DC universe without looking out of place. And while yes, technically you could count the fact that he's susceptible to being shot or stabbed as a weakness, his greatest weakness is his inability to trust anyone, even his closest allies. Batman is constantly finding himself in situations where he doesn't give his allies the full picture, and as a result, he or his teammates are put in unnecessary danger. The most famous example of this comes from the Tower of Babel storyline, when it was revealed that Batman had developed detailed plans about how to destroy each of his friends and teammates. Ra's al Ghul managed to steal these plans and do a lot of damage to the heroes before Batman realized what was happening. Frankly, it is only through dumb luck that none of the League members were killed in this incident. When the dust settled, the team was furious with Batman for breaching their trust and putting all of them in danger. As the writer of the story, Mark Waid, recently said in an interview where he talked about this arc, Batman's sin to the Justice League was not that he had these plans to counteract each of them. It was that he didn't tell them. If he had just said to Superman, "Listen, just in case you want to know, I have a backup in case you ever go nuts," Superman would go, "Awesome, that's good to hear." This is a lesson that Batman has yet to really absorb, despite the amount of times his secrecy has blown up in his face, such as when he kept the Batman Who Laughs prisoner under the Hall of Justice without telling anyone. Number 9. Zatanna has to be able to speak. Zatanna is a stage magician who happens to be capable of real magic. She is capable of casting powerful enchantments that can range from turning enemies into rabbits or erasing their memories. She casts these spells by saying what she wants backwards. For example, when she wants to turn rain into flowers, she says Niar Semo Keb Suru Wolf. The one limitation on this power is that to cast these spells, she has to be able to speak the incantations. So, unlike other magic-wielding characters like, say, Doctor Strange, who could cast a spell by wordlessly waving their hands, if someone manages to gag Zatanna, she is incapable of doing anything to further defend herself, as happened when she was captured by the Joker, who slit her throat and threw her into a water tank. However, she was eventually able to heal herself by using blood magic and writing the spell backwards in her own blood. Number 8. Daredevil's radar sense gets confused. When Matt Murdock was a young boy, he was hit by a truck that was carrying a radioactive isotope. This isotope got in his eyes and blinded him, but also heightened his other senses, allowing him to develop his trademark radar sense, which helps him navigate the world and fight crime as Daredevil. While this does give him several advantages, it is also prone to being overstimulated by kinda random things. For example, if he ends up underwater, he can easily lose his bearings and have trouble telling up from down. Even worse though is his weakness to rain. This weakness is kinda inconsistent, as in other versions of the character, like the Ben Affleck movie, rain allows him to see things more clearly, but in the comics it is a serious handicap for the character. In issue 25 of the 2011 Daredevil series, Matt is fighting a villain named Ikari who has a similar radar sense. The fight leads them to a sporting goods store where Matt's narration reveals that he has always been worried that a villain will someday think to use a sprinkler system against him, as rain negates his sense of smell, overwhelms his hearing, and makes his radar sense practically useless, cutting his by 95%. Considering how often it seems to rain in Marvel's New York and how dependent Daredevil is on his radar sense, this is a pretty rough weakness. Number 7. Black Canary if she gets a sore throat. Dinah Lance is the second hero to use the alias of Black Canary, with her mother being the first. While her mother was limited to being a capable hand-to-hand fighter and being able to train canaries to do amazing feats, her daughter has the ability to unleash the powerful canary cry. How she manages this varies depending on the continuity, with it sometimes being a byproduct of a wizard's curse, and sometimes being due to her carrying the metahuman gene. But what the power does remains consistent. The canary cry allows Dinah to control her vocal cords to generate a powerful sonic attack that can deafen her opponents, and when she really lets loose, can destroy metal and even kill people. However, she needs to be in good vocal health to achieve this, and if she ever has laryngitis, she is unable to unleash the Canary cry. However, even without the cry, she is one of the best martial artists in the DC universe, so she still manages okay. Number 6. Wolverine's metal skeleton. Wolverine has always been a powerful mutant sporting claws and a healing factor that makes him practically unkillable. Between that and his super acute senses, his more than a century of combat training, and his berserker rage, he is not someone you want as an enemy. These abilities got an upgrade when the Weapon X program got a hold of him and coated his skeleton and claws with an indestructible metal called adamantium. While this does make him even more durable, it does come with certain drawbacks. For example, it does make it much more difficult for Wolverine to swim, and foes often take advantage of this, trapping the clawed Canadian underwater and making him experience the feeling of drowning until he manages to escape. The other drawback to this, of course, is that it makes him vulnerable to magnetism. While this wouldn't be too bad of a weakness for most heroes, I mean, how often do you really come across a giant magnet in the world? Wolverine has the misfortune of being a member of the one superhero team that is constantly fighting against a character who is able to manipulate metal with his mind. At best, this makes him immobile for most of the encounters against Magneto, and at worst, it results in him getting his skeleton torn out. Number 5. Snowbird can't leave Canada. When the Inuit goddess of the Northern Lights, Nelvana, needed an agent on Earth to help prevent the return of the evil mystical great beasts, she mated with a human and had the shaman, Michael Two Young Men, use his magic to help deliver the child on Earth. Naria was given a decent grab bag of powers, the most notable of which is the ability to transform into any creature found in the Canadian Arctic. She has used this power to become owls, bears, and even whales, which makes her a formidable force against her enemies. However, due to Shaman not being specific enough when casting the spell that bound her spirit to the land, she is somewhat limited in where she can go. If Snowbird goes or is taken beyond the Canadian borders, she grows weak and sick. The longer she is out of Canada, the weaker she gets, and if she stays out of the country too long, she could even die. This weakness was discovered in Alpha Flight number 12 when the team learned that their leader, Guardian, had walked into a trap set by the evil Omega Flight in New York and teleported to his location to try and save him. Snowbird immediately became emaciated and old and nearly died, and was therefore more of a hindrance than a help in this scenario. Snowbird died in a later comic and was eventually brought back, and as a result, this weakness seems to have disappeared, as she has since traveled outside of Canada and has even left the planet without any ill effects. Number 4. Martian Manhunter and his addiction. John Jones is an alien from the planet Mars who has insanely strong telepathic powers that allow him to read and control minds. He also has super strength and the ability to shapeshift, and the ability to become intangible and phase through objects, making him a very difficult hero to defeat. For many years, Martian Manhunter had a psychosomatic weakness to fire that would cause him to lose the use of his powers and be burned. This weakness is kind of a problem when you consider how many superhero battles result in buildings or cars catching on fire, but what I want to focus on is a lesser known weakness, his cookie addiction. In Martian Manhunter Volume 2, number 24, we learn that John has developed an intense love of Choco's cookies, the DC equivalent to Oreos. When Blue Beetle and Booster Gold decide to play a prank on him by stealing his cookies and buying all the Chocos in a mile radius, we learn that when Martian Manhunter goes too long without his fix, he becomes a mindless Hulk-like creature who angrily smashes up the city, screaming about how he needs his cookies. His rampage isn't stopped until Booster Gold and Blue Beetle lead him to a warehouse full of Chocos where he greedily begins to devour them. Once Manhunter is back to normal, Batman discovers that the chemicals in Chocos, though relatively harmless to human biology, are extremely addictive to Martian physiologies. So yeah, fire is a bad weakness, but a cookie dependency issue is way worse. Number 3. Domino suffers from electorophobia. Nina Thurman has the mutant ability to subconsciously manipulate probability when she finds herself in stressful or dangerous situations in order to give herself the best possible outcome. In simpler terms, she's extremely lucky. If she is shot at, she will instinctively know exactly the right way to duck and dodge her way past the bullets, or the enemy's gun might simply jam. She can make the highly improbable happen in order to survive almost any situation, and it has made her a very difficult character character to defeat, but not impossible. In Deadpool Volume 4, number 17, the Merc with a Mouth is planning on assassinating one of the X-Men's most vocal critics in order to earn a place on the team. The X-Men of course do not want to be embroiled in this kind of scandal and send Domino to deal with Deadpool. She ties him to a bed and the two talk, with Wade confessing that he is terrified of cows and Domino revealing that she is terrified of chickens. You'd think she was kidding or lying, but later in the issue when Deadpool escapes and goes after the target again, Domino and Wolverine chase after him only to be taken out of commission when crawling through an air vent when they end up face to face with a chicken. Domino is paralyzed with fear and unable to continue on, which delays her and Wolverine long enough for Deadpool to get away. Considering how much poultry seems to affect her, Domino is lucky she doesn't come across them more often. Number 2. Mon-El and Lead. One day when Superman was just a young Superboy, he looked to the sky and saw a crashing rocket. He intercepted it and discovered a young man inside with a locket from Clark's Kryptonian parents, Jor-El and Lara Lor-Van, wishing him luck on his travels. The young man had suffered amnesia, but the fact that he had the same powers as Superboy led Clark to deduce that this was his long-lost brother from Krypton. He named him Mon-El, and the two began fighting crime together while enjoying their newfound sense of family. However, Superboy soon became suspicious of his new brother, as Krypto didn't seem to recognize him, and his belt was made from a metal not found on Krypton's periodic table. As he did a lot in the Silver Age, Clark began putting Mon-El through a series of elaborate and convoluted tests to prove he was an imposter. He took a bunch of lead balls and painted them green before throwing them into space. He then went to a nearby planet with Mon-El to play baseball. When the green balls showed up, Superboy pretended they were kryptonite meteors and pretended to be affected. When Mon-El also began acting sick, Clark took this as proof that he was an imposter, but as Mon-El's amnesia wore off, he revealed that he was actually from the planet Daxam and had met Jor-El on his travels. As a Daxamite, he had the same powers as Superboy, but really did have a vulnerability to lead. While a Kryptonian would return to full health when kryptonite was removed, a Daxamite exposed to lead was doomed to a slow and painful death. Superboy was forced to put Mon-El in the Phantom Zone until he could find a cure. Mon-El has had a few adventures since then as a member of the Legion of Superheroes, but the fact that he could be killed by a relatively common element is pretty dumb. Number 1. Aquaman gets dehydrated. As the son of a human and an Atlantean, Arthur Curry is capable of some pretty astounding feats. He is able to survive underwater and swim at incredible speeds. He has super strength and expert fighting skills, as well as the ability to control the oceans when wielding the Trident of Poseidon. Oh, and he can also talk to and control fish, an ability that might seem lame until he attacks you with a megalodon. However, he also has a weakness that is pretty silly. If Aquaman doesn't go back in the water every hour, he begins to grow weak and dehydrated. The severity of this weakness depends on who is writing the comic and what continuity you're in, but the Silver Age version of this character was particularly vulnerable. A great example of this is in Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen number 115, when Jimmy developed the same powers as Aquaman. A villain impersonating Superman was able to trick Aquaman and Jimmy into entering a competition where they stayed out of the water for an hour and then crawled through the desert trying not to die, as the fake Superman taunted them with a pitcher of water. For those wondering, Jimmy won the competition and was made the new king of Atlantis. After they defeated the villain, he ceded the throne back to Aquaman, but the fact that Jimmy beat him in a nefarious but fair competition, and by rights is the true king of Atlantis, makes you realize why Aquaman has so much trouble being taken seriously.
Number 10. Spider-Man. Spider-Man is generally known for being one of the most powerful and most iconic heroes out there, but even he has his weaknesses. In fact, while many of them are not as famous as he is, some of them are pretty ridiculous, including his weakness to ethyl chloride, something that also slows and weakens spiders in the natural world. So if you were ever wondering if there might be a bug spray that you could use to fight against Spider-Man, the answer is actually kinda yes. Although make sure you bring a big spray can of ethyl chloride, as he is a lot bigger than your average spider. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you are loving what we are doing here at Top 10 Nerd, why not hit that subscribe button? It really helps us out and you get more of our content, so yay! Number 9. Superman. Superman is a character that we generally associate with strength, but not often weakness, which is interesting considering that he actually has quite a few weaknesses, probably the weirdest among them being magic. The best way to defeat Superman would simply be to become a magic user, because against them he becomes kinda powerless. When it comes to the explanation for why, a lot of people's theories surrounding this have to do with the fact that Superman's powers are naturally occurring, not magic based themselves, although this is usually used as a means to weaken him in the comics, as he doesn't have a natural means to defend against magic, and it's one of the few things like kryptonite that his invulnerability ability does not protect him from. In fact, narratively speaking, this is likely why he was made weak to magic to begin with, to help give him more to struggle against as a character, as he's kinda OP usually. Number 8. Rogue. Rogue was one of my favorite characters growing up, and I think what I loved about her so much was the tragedy of her story and her powers. But what's even more, I love the way that Rogue overcame them. Still, this would be a terrible weakness to have or have had, so that's why I'm including Rogue on our list. Rogue's powers allow her to adopt the powers of whoever she comes into physical contact with, actually taking their powers for herself, basically draining them. But that's not all Rogue takes with her touch. She can also take your memories and drain your life force. Or at least, she could do that. Rogue has since overcome this weakness by facing her fears. As it turns out, it was her own subconscious that was basically making it manifest. Number 7. Wonder Woman. One of Wonder Woman's original weaknesses seems to be in line with what she represents as a character: female power and strength. As an Amazon, Wonder Woman was initially also susceptible to losing her strength and power if she was ever restrained by a man. While some might see this as kind of a sexist weakness in the comics, I would actually see it as kind of being the opposite. To me, it's more meant to symbolize a history of oppression against women and its consequences. At least that's how I see that weakness. However, regardless of any greater meaning behind it, it was also a pretty silly weakness in the sense that it made Wonder Woman fairly easy to defeat under certain circumstances, and if she was going up against men, because if they just found her bracelets, that's kinda it. So I do have to say I'm glad this is no longer a rule for her in the comics today. Number 6. Nightcrawler. Well, Nightcrawler is a super powerful character overall, and an iconic and amazing character as well. He isn't actually the most powerful teleporter. This has to do with his weird restrictions and weaknesses surrounding teleportation. The big one being that he can only teleport by a max distance of about, I believe, 2 miles at a time. The other main one being the more that he teleports, the more exhausted he gets, and Kurt as a teleporter can tire fairly quickly if he's forced to make multiple jumps, which if he has to go far, he kind of has to do because each jump he can only go so far. Kurt does teleport through the Brimstone dimension, which I saw some people in the comics bringing up as like a super powerful thing, but this is actually more how his teleportation skills work. It's not necessarily something he's choosing to do, as he has to travel through the Brimstone dimension to get where he's going. So while yes, he can travel interdimensionally, it's only one dimension, and it's not really by choice, it's more by design. However, Kurt is an amazing character because of his limitations. That's what makes him so great. It means that when Kurt has to push it to save the day, and he often of course does just that because he really is a hero, he's often putting his life on the line for ideals he believes in, or for all of Earth or all of life itself, whatever he's defending. That's why we love Kurt. Number 5. Green Lantern. Hal Jordan is Green Lantern, or one of the Green Lanterns anyways, and as a Green Lantern he has a pretty iconic and ridiculous weakness, or at least for a very long time in the comics he did have that weakness. Hal had a weakness to the color yellow. In fact, all Green Lanterns did for a while. This was as a result of parallax existing within the Green Lantern Corps' central battery. Having the entity of fear within the battery caused all Green Lanterns to develop a weakness to yellow, something that was used in All-Star Batman and Robin and Frank Miller's alternate reality to weaken and torment Hal Jordan's Green Lantern. In the All-Star Batman and Robin comic, Batman and Robin basically paint themselves and an entire safe house yellow, just to teach Hal a lesson about meddling in Batman's affairs. Number 4. Black Cat. Black Cat is an anti-hero over at Marvel Comics, who is generally known for being an ally and sometimes romantic partner of Spider-Man. While she typically is shown as being a skilled thief with acrobatic skills and superb training and experience as a fighter, at least that's how she was depicted initially, she doesn't usually have any superpowers to speak of. However, at one point, she did just have straight up powers, and this happened for Black Cat when the Kingpin granted her wish of getting them. However, because this was the Kingpin, it of course did not work out exactly as Felicia had planned. She ended up with bad luck powers, which were extremely useful when fighting an enemy, but not so useful when with an ally or anyone else, as they actually affected not just her opponents, but like anyone who was close to her, which means that Peter suffered from them as well. To make matters worse, Felicia kept her powers a secret from him, which ended up driving a wedge between the two when it came to their romantic and working relationships with one another. Number 3. Green Lantern. Alan Scott used to have a hilarious weakness, similar to someone else on our list actually. Let me know in the comments when and if you figure out who I'm talking about here. Alan Scott had a weakness to wood. The explanation for why and how this weakness developed was explained later by the fact that Alan was snuck up on and basically attacked using a wooden club sort of, and as a result he's subconsciously manifested this as a weakness of his, due to him mistaking it for one when in reality, you know, it just hurts to get smacked by a piece of wood, because that just hurts. Thankfully, Alan Scott has overcome this, and this strange weakness that was actually originally tied to being the hero Green Lantern in the comics no longer bothers Alan, or any other Green Lanterns for that matter. Number 2. Iska the Unbeaten. Iska is a super interesting character. On one hand, she is extremely powerful and can never lose. She can even potentially have her power utilized to manipulate the stakes of other competitions that she's pulled into. However, this also implies that there are times when she has zero control over her powers, in the sense that she cannot influence the result of an unbalanced battle. In fact, her powers will pull her to serve the side that will be victorious, regardless of whether or not she wants to, in terms of what her mind or her heart is saying to her. This has meant that Iska has been forced to turn her back on her own people, the mutants of Arakko, more than once. She has also had to fight against family, colleagues, and friends before as a result. Although the one thing she can control at times is kind of how she approaches the fighting part of, you know, the battle. Meaning that if she has the option, you know, she can try to fight others involved as opposed to those that she is specifically close to. Like during her fight against planet Arakko and the Great Ring, when she was teleported away to the planet's ocean by Nightcrawler and chose to stay there fighting the planet's creatures in the name of Uranos and the Eternals, as opposed to fighting her own people directly, or continuing to fight them directly. Number 1. Power Girl. Power Girl probably has one of the weirdest weaknesses around. Despite being a Kryptonian who is on the level of Superman when it comes to her powers and her strength, she can easily be harmed simply if you use organic materials to hurt her. You know that saying about sticks and stones, which may break your bones? Well, for Power Girl, despite having super durability and invulnerability, this is true. Sticks and stones could break her bones, but industrial steel probably wouldn't hurt her for some reason. Raw organic materials, which have been unprocessed, are revealed to be a weakness of Power Girl's in Supergirl issue number 16 from the 1996 series. Power Girl shares this revelation with her alternate self from the main continuity at the time, who was shocked by the revelation. Which, I mean, fair enough, I would be too if I were Linda Danvers, who was Supergirl at that time. However, I will say I don't think that Kara has this weakness anymore in the comics, thank goodness, but in the 90s, it was a thing, and it was there for some reason.
Number 10. Nukes. So just like nukes are a pretty big deal to humans, if you launched one right at a Kryptonian, you can hold them off probably for a little while. We see this happen in Batman vs Superman, and it takes inspiration from The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller. In the graphic novel, we see Superman go after a nuke, and after he gets a little too close for comfort, he withers up like an old apple. All that radiation gets to him. It's kind of similar to what we see on screen actually. But luckily our sun was in field of view for old Clarky, and he charged himself back from Michael Jackson's Thriller mode back into handsome Henry Cavill mode. And before we continue on to number 9, if you guys could go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, it does wonders for our channel. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Now let's go check out some more weaknesses for Superman. Number 9. Red Sun Radiation. While our sun can certainly recharge the Man of Steel back into punch mode, Red Sun Radiation can do the opposite of heal. It can damage Kryptonians because it gives off more radiation. So in Superman War of the Supermen, we see a red sun instantly start to weaken and suffocate Superman and Supergirl. It's because red sun radiation replaces the yellow solar energy in Superman's cells, eliminating his powers. Red sunlight was actually the main source of solar energy near Krypton, but Clark spent so much time around our sun on this planet that it clearly works better for him. Except for his mustache, whenever it comes to that. Doesn't really seem like anything works with that upper lip problem that we have. Number 8. High-pitched noises. You ever accidentally scrape your fork against the plate and that high-pitched squeal that comes from it makes your spine want to like pop out the back of your neck? God, it's the worst. My sister almost kills me every time I scrape just a tiny thing, I swear to God. Well, even Superman gets weak when he hears high-pitched noises like that as well. Now, of course, they're much louder than just a fork. See, his super hearing makes Black Canary and Silver Banshee a nightmare for him, because they can get pretty loud. So Batman tries this out against Clark in Batman vs Superman as well, and for a moment or two, it actually works on holding him back. Check it out. So maybe if Bruce had the world's biggest dog whistle, he could mess him up. Or that cowboy guy that sings like really high pitched in the mountains. I'm sure if he belted, Clark would definitely explode, perhaps. Number 7, magic. Superman can probably take 1,000 bullets to the body and then walk away like it's no problem. But the magician David Blaine, you never know, he could be pretty threatening to a Kryptonian. That's right, magic can indeed hurt Superman. His biomatrix is a powerful asset, but the strength in it can be used against him, specifically in the form of radiation that's found in magical energies. Electromagnetic or extra-dimensional signatures disrupt his force field, weakening him, of course. Now, it depends what kind of magic is being used and how much of it is being shot out at him, but magic in general has unpredictable effects on him, and his magical enemies have often been the ones that are the most dangerous or come out on top, at least for a little bit. Number 6, the Black Tide. In Action Comics issue 788, Superman is in a world where the air is filled with fire and a force called the Black Tide. This mysterious force causes Superman's chi flow to be disrupted. So he suffers in fatigue and pain until he gets a nice acupuncture appointment. Yeah, in the very next issue, we see Clark getting back on his feet with a few well-placed needles. He even asks if they're the world's strongest needles, and she's like, nope, they're just in the right spots. So acupuncture, it's the only remedy that realigns his spirit, who knew? Number 5, love. Yeah, of course I said it. When it comes to weaknesses, some would say that it's just the thing you love most used against you. Now this of course has come to light in many comics, movies, TV shows. It's not necessarily new. The whole damsel in distress thing, of course it's gonna work. Where in order to keep Superman to bend at your will, you just gotta get Lois Lane or Martha in your custody, and then you can get Superman to go and fist fight Batman. It's the best. And then we watch movies eating popcorn. We're like, yes, keep fighting. In Batman vs Superman, we see Barry Allen pop in from the Speed Force to let Bruce know that Lois Lane is the key. What key? What was he talking about? Well, that plus the nightmare sequence, it was apparent in that film that she was the key in preventing the Man of Steel from going evil and causing this world to look like chaos. Their love is keeping Kal-El from going nuts. Check it out. Number 4, lead. Superman is the best at playing hide and seek. He can see through walls, so no matter where you're hiding, odds are he's already found you if he's looking for you. But if you were to hide behind a lead wall, you just may win that game of hide and seek against a Kryptonian. How crazy is that? He has vision that matches the properties of X-ray. They call it X-ray vision, but the thing is, X-rays don't work with lead. That's why when you get an X-ray done at the dentist, they slap that bulletproof vest on you, then they like plug their ears and run out of the room. It's because that's lead. That's a no-go in the hashtag X-ray life. So it can actually help Superman out a bit though. See, as lead can block out kryptonite radiation. So it's, you know, it can kind of help Superman, but it can also be used against him. Superman's got a real love-hate relationship with pencils, it seems. Pencils. Number 3, Muhammad Ali. I have to include this because it's too amazing not to mention. Okay, so earlier in this list I talked about how red sun energy can weaken a Kryptonian. So even though Superman is weak now, he's still probably at least a really strong dude, right? Well, there was once one comic book issue where a weakened Superman legit had to fight Muhammad Ali, and it was more intense than Mayweather vs. McGregor, at least in my opinion. Definitely yours too. See, this one shot made its debut back in 1978, written by Dennis O'Neil and Neil Adams. And it featured the Man of Steel and of course Muhammad Ali. And it was part of the all-new collector's edition where this alien named Ratlar, who's part of a species known as the Scrub, they visit Earth. And they demand that we pick our best fighter to go against theirs. Now of course theirs being a behemoth named Hunya, so yikes. Now, if we refuse, well, the Scrub will then destroy the planet. So Muhammad Ali argues that since Superman isn't technically from Earth, Muhammad Ali must be the one who fights, which is so amusing for us. We're like, yes, thank God, do it. So Ratlar is amused by this and he wants to know who is better of the two. So he pins the two champs up against each other and the fight is set to take place on Bodes, which is orbiting a red star. So no more crazy powers for Superman, just old fisticuffs. And Muhammad Ali drops the Man of Steel. I would say I'm surprised, but Ali is literally the greatest, so not too surprised here. Number 2, psionics. Kryptonians are vulnerable to psychic and telekinetic attacks. Superman may be stronger than most things in existence. His mind is still just as capable of being brainwashed like most of us. He's vulnerable to magic, so when it comes to psionic attacks, those tend to work against the Man of Steel in a similar manner. Telekinesis can attack Superman's molecular structure, so when the damage is on a microscopic level, it's hard to overcome and pinpoint. The Green Lantern chip at one point took over the Kryptonian's mind in issue 10 of Injustice Gods Among Us, year 2. He's small but mighty, but he can also think small, so you're kinda screwed. And number 1, you guessed it, kryptonite. Most of us heard the song Kryptonite by Three Doors Down growing up. In fact, now that I mentioned it, it's probably stuck in your head. So good. My first song I ever learned on guitar. That's right, kryptonite. Okay, since the final days of Krypton, its remains were now deemed radioactive after the whole explosion thing, and parts of kryptonite were now floating around in space. This crystalline substance has a specific radioactive wavelength that's lethal to those who are native to its reality. The most common form is the type we see in Batman vs Superman. It's called bright green kryptonite, and it's poison to Kal-El. In the comic Batman and Superman issue 44, he gets a blast of kryptonite shards to the face, and it does not look pleasant in any manner. Well guys, there you have it. The Man of Steel does indeed have a few weak spots. Who knew?
Coming in at number 10 today, it's Luke Cage's impenetrable skin. Thanks to the super soldier experiment known as the bursting process, Luke Cage Power Man does have incredible strength, stamina, and a healing factor, but he is pretty much most known for the fact that he is protected by indestructible, impenetrable, super dense skin. That is an awesome power to have. Luke is protected from almost anything with this titanium-like skin, but the problem here is that this natural shield isn't just shielding him from the outside. Whenever Luke Cage is internally injured, which is rarely, the character requires more than almost anyone else ever would. It's next to impossible to perform surgery on Luke Cage unless you happen to have access to an overpowered medical laser. The natural ways someone might be healed from some kind of internal injury do not apply, as doctors can't even cut through Cage's skin to begin the procedure in the first place. As you can imagine, this can be pretty problematic.
In a 50% off sales, Captain Margaret Elizabeth, or Peggy Carter, was a distinguished Avenger and founding member of the Illuminati, who played a crucial role in the Infinity War of 2018 of our world, where she valiantly fought against Thanos and aided during the Battle of Titan. In the aftermath, when Doctor Strange utilized the Darkhold for dreamwalking, resulting in a multiversal threat of, incursions, Carter, along with the rest of the Illuminati, voted in favor of executing him to safeguard their universe. In the years that followed, Carter found herself presiding over a hearing concerning an alternate version of Doctor Strange, who was apprehended by Baron Mordo on suspicions of posing a similar danger. Before the vote could be finalized though, to condemn this alternate Doctor Strange, their headquarters came under attack by the Scarlet Witch. Carter and her fellow Illuminati confronted her, but tragically she met her demise when Scarlet Witch used her own shield to cut her in half, hence the 50% off sale. The amount of times that Cap has caught his shield though makes me question why Carter was able to be cut in half by hers.
Number 8. Chickens, or electorophobia. The mutant Domino is pretty darn unique. Her mutant ability allows her to subliminally and psionically initiate random kinetic phenomena that affect probability in her favor by making improbable, but importantly not impossible, things to occur within her line of sight. What does that mean? Basically she has good luck. Really good luck. So how do you give a weakness to someone with such a strange and honestly powerful power as luck? Easy. You make her absolutely terrified of chickens. Now, obviously not a lot of people are running across chickens very often, and I think that holds true for superheroes. But for someone with such super-powered luck as Domino, she runs into chickens more than should be acceptable. And that's pretty unlucky because her fear of chickens is quite debilitating.
In its 7, chewing gum. The Justice Buster Batsuit is a mech suit that's part of Batman's Fenrir contingency, which is designed to take down the entirety of the Justice League if they were to turn bad. Making its feature appearance in Batman Endgame, when the Joker used his virus to warp the brains of the Justice League at the beginning of this Endgame plot, Batman was forced to use the Fenrir protocol to eliminate the teammates, or well, to at least subdue them. The suit was successful in eliminating Wonder Woman, the Flash, and Aquaman, but met an even match at the hands of Superman. After a lengthy fight, Superman tore through the armor and nearly killed Batman until Bruce used kryptonite chewing gum to spit in Clark's face, rendering him unconscious. Come on, okay? Imagine waking up to learn that you passed out because Batman spit on your face. Seriously, please, brush your tongue, okay? You get one of those tongue scrapers. Your breath is lethal. Not to mention the miniaturized red suns for Knuckles, they didn't help. You had to spit kryptonite chewing gum.
Number 6. Ethyl chloride. Ethyl chloride, a common compound found in pesticides and bug sprays, is essentially Spider-Man's kryptonite, and it severely impairs his senses. This makes ethyl chloride extremely powerful against Spider-Man. It's one of his biggest weaknesses, but yet ethyl chloride isn't being used by all of his villains all the time, even though it's actually a very common compound. The big reason why it doesn't show up much is that ethyl chloride is considered to be so supremely powerful against Spider-Man that there was a momentary ban placed on the substance by Marvel writers. It was literally becoming too easy to bring down Spidey, so writers got lazy and used it as a crutch just way too many times. Amazing Spider-Man number 106 has Spider-Man engaging in battle with the Spider Slayer Mark IV, which had the villainous addition of ethyl chloride. After trapping Spider-Man in a web, Smythe, the guy who created it, uses his machine to douse Peter with a cloud of the compound, and Spider-Man is weakened by the spray and finds himself unable to move, giving his enemies the chance to strike.
Halfway through into number 5, breathing. If I said Batman vs. Hulk, I think we should all agree, unless you're in denial, on the outcome, right? Talk about a one-sided fight. Batman standing up to Superman is one thing, they share a universe, he can get kryptonite, whatever. But Batman and the Hulk? No. Unfortunately though, they have gone toe-to-toe, and surprisingly, Batman achieved the impossible feat of defeating Hulk. In the harmonious days of 1981, when DC and Marvel were on friendly terms and the concept of separate universes hadn't really come to fruition, they occasionally collaborated on crossover stories. One such amusing tale unfolded in DC's Special Series number 27, written by the late Len Wein and illustrated by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. In the extraordinary encounter, Batman unexpectedly crossed paths with a rampaging Hulk, manipulated by the Joker to view Batman as a villain. The Hulk turned his fury towards the Caped Crusader, and Batman, recognizing the immense power of his opponent, somehow skillfully evaded Hulk's fists with every move, because, you know, one hit would kill him. With calculated precision, Batman then deployed a pellet of knockout gas, which was disorienting the Hulk, but, you know, not knocking him out because it's the Hulk. Exploiting a moment of weakness, Batman incapacitated the Jade Giant by kicking him in the gut, forcing Hulk to inhale. That's right, yeah, Batman kicked Hulk in the gut and actually made him flinch.
Number 4, Asbestos. Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, was one of my favorite superheroes as a kid. He can create, absorb, and manipulate fire, which is pretty awesome. His Nova Flame is hot enough to vaporize the particles of anything in his way, except of course for asbestos. Now, thankfully in our modern world, we know that asbestos is pretty incredibly toxic, and it's totally banned across most of the world. But you see, back when the Human Torch was first created in 1963, it was used to insulate pipes and wires, soundproof rooms, and even make cheap garden furniture. And the Human Torch was wide open to asbestos-based attacks. Specifically though, the Torch has found himself going up against villains based on the stuff: Asbestos Lady and Asbestos Man. Both of these villains made use of asbestos-based outfits or armor and tools of the trade. But like I said, we know this stuff to be incredibly toxic, but we didn't know that then. So as time went on, Asbestos Lady, aka Victoria Murdoch, passed on from idiopathic mesothelioma at age 45, presumably from asbestos exposure, and Asbestos Man was forced to start wearing an oxygen mask and presumably also passed on due to his asbestos exposure. I guess they also had a weakness to the stuff, huh? R.I.P. R.I.P. in the chat.
Getting close to the end of number 3, bullets! Now, with the Flash being the fastest man alive, you'd expect him to, you know, be able to react to things. And while this weakness isn't exactly showcased with the Scarlet Speedster in a meaningful way, it is certainly demonstrated well by his counterpart, the Reverse Flash. Imagine our surprise when Reverse Flash ends up getting popped in the head by none other than Thomas Wayne in the Flashpoint timeline so that Barry could access enough Speed Force to save the world and bring his son back. Batman shot Reverse Flash in the head. And while this apparently killed Thawne, that was far from the end of the story, because Thawne started vibrating as fast as he could to slow the destruction of his brain. This gave him more time to avoid death and gave him the ability to hold a grudge. But seriously, shooting a speedster in the head has to be one of the dumbest ways a speedster has been defeated. And that's including the entirety of the Flash TV series, even the final season where he shakes hands with the negative Speed Force.
Number 2,
yellow. Never eat the yellow snow. It's a rule that a lot of us know. While that may be a statement made to stop small children from consuming human or animal pee, I think it would be a perfect saying to introduce into the Green Lantern Corps. Hal Jordan has protected the Earth from interplanetary threats with his incredibly powerful ring and his incredibly powerful will. And yet, you face him armed with a handful of buttercups and he is rendered practically useless. According to the comics, an impurity in the ring's power source meant that Jordan became powerless when faced with the color yellow. This was later expanded by Jeff Johns' Green Lantern Rebirth as being tied to Parallax, a yellow fear entity who was locked in the central power battery, thus weakening it. Now, when you say it like that, it begins to make, I guess, a little bit more sense, but before this was revealed though, Green Lantern's weakness was just dumb. And it still kind of is. This is no more evident than in All-Star Batman and Robin by Frank Miller, specifically issue number 9 when the Caped Crusader trapped Hal Jordan in a yellow painted room and let a yellow suited Robin go to town on him. And this is all because it's the dumbest weakness we have ever heard of. Bruce Wayne said it himself, so it has to be true.
And it was all yellow. And finally, in at number 1, wood. Wow, look at that. Green Lantern number 1 and number 2. Throughout the years, Green Lantern has encountered various weaknesses tied to his powers, okay, like yellow. But one particular vulnerability has been overlooked by most comic writers, mostly because it's specific to the Alan Scott version. Green Lanterns, they use their powers, they use them to fly, communicate in different languages, create energy constructs, or will constructs, I guess, because, you know, green. But you know, you have to balance it out somehow. So in Alan Scott's case, wood was the chosen weakness. It has an explanation, and it stems from the subconscious belief that his abilities couldn't affect the material, and that's literally it. He didn't have the belief that he could do anything to wood, so he couldn't, which just showcases that belief is the most powerful superpower of all, unless you're facing against a number 2 pencil, which I guess would actually take out both of them.
At number 10 is Toyman. Toyman, an unexpected powerhouse to the DC universe, stands as a testament to the idea that power isn't solely defined by raw strength. His arsenal of whimsical toys may seem harmless, but they've confounded to some of the mightiest heroes, with some iconic showdowns proving his prowess. In the Justice League animated series, Toyman took on the Man of Steel himself, armed with a giant robot wielding a disintegrating beam. He used it and targeted Batman and Wonder Woman, but it was Superman, the embodiment of strength, who intervened. With unwavering heroism, he sacrificed himself, intercepting the beam that vanquished him instantly, leaving no trace behind. This momentous clash underscores that power that isn't always about brute force. Toyman's genius and unpredictability outwitted Superman, reminding us that even the most potent heroes can fall before unconventional adversaries. At number 9, Wolverine loses to a couple of dudes. Wolverine, the indomitable mutant known for his regenerative powers, faced a stunning defeat at the hands of mere agents. This pivotal loss occurred during his dark past as part of the Weapon X program, aka like his origin story. These agents didn't possess any superhuman strength or extraordinary abilities, but they just wielded advanced technology, including a stun gun. In a dramatic encounter, the agents ambushed Wolverine, shooting him with the stun gun. Though Logan, with his exceptional healing factor, attempted to resist, the electric shock disrupted his powers temporarily, and consequently, he was incapacitated and whisked away into the nefarious laboratory for the notorious adamantium bonding process. This episode serves as a stark reminder that even the most powerful superheroes can fall victim to cunning tactics and advanced weaponry, emphasizing the vulnerability that often accompanies extraordinary abilities in the world of comics. If you're enjoying this video so far, by the way, you can support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. At number 8, the Joker. The Joker's ability to topple superheroes while struggling against Batman is indeed perplexing. It raises questions about the power dynamics within the DC universe. Batman's unbreakable will and intellect have often been weapons against the Crown Prince of Crime, but it seems like the Joker has an eerie knack for unsettling even the Man of Steel. In the Emperor Joker storyline, the Joker's cunning manipulation of reality through Mr. Pitilix's powers lead to Superman's imprisonment in Arkham Asylum, a shocking outcome. And furthermore, the Injustice Saga reveals another sinister chapter where Joker's deception pushes Superman to the brink, resulting in Lois Lane's death and Metropolis's annihilation at Superman's hands. Perhaps it's the unpredictability of chaos embodied by the Joker's mediocre that makes him a formidable adversary, even for the mighty Superman. The complexities of hero-villain dynamics in the DC universe continue to baffle and intrigue fans. At number 7 is Lex Luthor. In the sprawling tapestry of superhero rivalries, none have endured quite like the clash between Superman and his arch-nemesis, Lex Luthor. Their epic confrontations have etched themselves into the annals of comic book lore, yet what makes this rivalry truly fascinating are the moments when the mighty Man of Steel faltered against his seemingly lesser opponent, because he doesn't have any power, man. One such instance borders on the absurd: Lex Luthor's conquest over cancer. In an astonishing turn of events, Luthor uncovered a cure for this devastating disease. Crafty as ever, he ensnared Superman with a devious trap fueled by kryptonite. In a single fateful exchange, Lex emerged victorious. A bittersweet triumph for sure, but this one showcases the complexity of this age-old rivalry. Sorry Clark, but even a hero as iconic as you can't compete with curing cancer. At number 6, the Ultimates beat Thor. In the vast and intricate tapestry of superhero lore, there exist moments where the seemingly invincible stumble before adversaries who appear on the surface vastly inferior. The second Ultimate storyline plunges us into such conundrum, where the Earth's mightiest heroes, the Avengers, find themselves ensnared in a treacherous web of deception spun by the mischievous Loki. Thor, the god of thunder, wielding Mjolnir with unwavering might, stands as an emblem of power, and yet in this narrative, he's compelled to engage in a heart-wrenching battle against his comrades, manipulated by Loki's cunning illusions. Thor's innate reluctance to harm his friends proves as his Achilles heel, and when he finally unleashes his divine fury, it's Loki who engineers a twist in reality, rendering Thor powerless. This vulnerability is exploited by the Ultimates, who, with Loki's machinations, capture the godly Avenger. At number 5 is Harley Quinn. Here's a classic tale of the underdog triumphing over the mighty, a narrative that twists but keeps us all on the edge of our seats. Enter Harley Quinn, the clown princess of crime, a character more known for her maniac laughter and colorful antics than her superhuman abilities. In a spiraling turn of events, Harley manages to defeat none other than the Man of Steel himself, Superman. This unlikely showdown occurred in a series of comic books where extraterrestrial forces coerced Superman into a boxing match against Harley Quinn. They journeyed to the Fortress of Solitude, where Superman's powers were temporarily drained. In a moment of sheer audacity, Harley swung a punch that sent Superman reeling, rendering him unconscious. It's a testament to the unpredictable nature of comic book storytelling, where even the mightiest heroes can be humbled by their seemingly inferior adversaries. So as they say in Gotham, how do you like that, Puddin'? At number 4 is Killer Frost. A villain more known for her chilling presence than her formidable powers, managed to pull off an incredible upset when she faced against the Man of Steel himself, Superman. In a grand showdown of Justice League versus the Squad, it seemed like another routine battle for the Justice League. They were dominating until the Enchantress entered the fray, incapacitating Superman with her mystic powers. But here's where it gets interesting. Amanda Waller, the mastermind behind the Squad, gave the order, and Frost absorbed Superman's life force. In that fleeting moment, she transcended her status as a weaker villain, and suddenly, she possessed strength to dispose not just Superman, but the entire Justice League. At number 3 is Dr. Light. In a world of superheroes and supervillains, is not always about raw power and brute force. And case in point, Superman the Man of Steel has faced numerous foes, but some of his most astonishing defeats come at the hands of seemingly weaker villains who wielded something even more potent: intelligence. Take Dr. Light, for example. In a mind-bending twist, this villain managed to outwit the invulnerable Superman. See, rather than relying on sheer physical might, Dr. Light used cunning and manipulation. He hypnotized the Man of Steel into a state where he was willing to commit the unthinkable, unaliving himself. But it wasn't just as straightforward as it sounds. To pull off this audacious scheme, Dr. Light cleverly had Superman search for a seemingly innocuous magic wand. Little did Supes know that the seemingly harmless item would become his downfall. Dr. Light, once Superman had given it to him, had used that very wand to end him. That even in the realm of superheroes and villains, brains can often peril over brawn. At number 2, Superman's lead supersuit. Superman is known for his powers and intelligence, but he once fell victim to a rather embarrassing defeat. Lex Luthor, his arch nemesis, took advantage of Superman's apparent lack of facial recognition skills. He disguised himself just with a wig, and somehow the Kryptonian superhero failed to see through the ruse. Superman actually accepted a costume design sold by Luthor in disguise. The suit was encased in lead, because Superman can't see through lead. But unbeknownst to the hero, that lead concealed the dreaded kryptonite, his Achilles heel. Luthor planned for the lead to erode away, exposing the kryptonite at just the right moment, weakening Superman when he least expected it. I mean, I don't know how Superman didn't see this coming. I mean, the suit just screamed trap with its bright yellow and purple design, complete with a green box that boldly proclaimed your name. It's a cautionary tale of overlooking the obvious, a lesson even the mightiest heroes can learn from. And at number 1 is Alfred Pennyworth beats up Superman. Yeah, that's right, Alfred Pennyworth, the unassuming butler of Bruce Wayne, often flies under the radar in the superhero realm, yet his unyielding determination and surprising resourcefulness has allowed him to claim a remarkable victory against one of the most iconic superheroes of all time. In the Injustice comic series, Superman, consumed by a ruthless quest for control, infiltrates the Batcave with the intent to incapacitate Superman. And with the Dark Knight left vulnerable and on the brink of defeat, Alfred steps into the ring. Now, Alfred is armed with the strength-enhancing super substance that he got from Lex Luthor, of course, and after consuming which, he wages a relentless assault on the Man of Steel. In a shocking turn of events, Alfred headbutts Superman, breaking the hero's nose, and proceeds to pummel him mercilessly, driving his face into the unforgiving floor. The surprising triumph stands as a testament to Alfred's unwavering dedication to protecting his surrogate family, showcasing that even the mightiest of superheroes can suffer humiliating defeats at the hands of seemingly weaker opponents. So the next time you're pondering the hero-villain dynamic, remember that raw strength isn't the only key to victory. Sometimes it's the unexpected, the cunning, and the strategic that can topple even the mightiest of caped crusaders.
Number 10, Detective Chimp. Detective Chimp might just be a chimp who also isn't necessarily known for his fighting prowess and strength, but he's also an extremely intelligent chimp who is considered to be one of the greatest detectives Earth actually has. Not only that, but he's also been tied to the realm of mysticism after he gained the Sword of Night. And friends, before I move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to let us know that you love us by clicking that like button. Seriously, it feeds the algorithm. Feed the algorithm. Number 9, Forge. Forge is kinda squishy in comparison to some other physically tougher and more durable heroes out there, which is why he makes our cut here. And he's not particularly well known for his fighting prowess, but he is well known for making cool stuff, especially cool weapons, and because of that, he is actually extremely useful. Many also forget that Forge has experience with shamanism and not only has a mutant origin, but an origin that is also attached to the world of magic and mysticism, which honestly is pretty cool. However, for those who want to argue that Forge could march in there alongside someone like Cyclops, I think he'd actually prefer to outfit someone like Cyclops to march into action in his stead, but super souped up, so that Cyc alone could stand in for a whole small army of heroes, and of course, Forge himself. Be like, I'll just make you super cool, you go in there, and then it's basically like there's two of us because you're gonna be that cool. Number 8, Fury. This version of Fury we're focusing on here is mainly known by the name of Lita Hall. This version of the character had her origin changed following the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Instead of being Diana Prince, Wonder Woman, and Steve Trevor's daughter, she would become known as the daughter of Helena Cosmatos, also Fury, who was raised instead by Admiral Derek Trevor and Miss America, aka Joan Dale Trevor. In the Sandman universe, she was once the partner of Hector Hall, and the two are going to have a child together when Hector tragically dies. While dead in the real world, Hector's consciousness becomes suspended in a pocket of the dreaming, with Brute and Glob turning him into their new Sandman after Dream's imprisonment. Lita is visited by Hector in her dreams and eventually chooses to stay with him there, but because their child is conceived in the dreaming, he ends up being claimed by the Dream Lord Morpheus once he himself returns. He forces Hector's spirit to move on and explains that one day he will come for Lita's child, who belongs to the dreaming. Despite her Amazonian-like abilities, Lita can be seen as weak in the traditional superhero sense, as she doesn't act as a hero in Neil Gaiman's Sandman series, and instead attempts to pursue a simple, normal life with her son. However, she gets insane anxiety when it comes to being separated from him at any moment because of Dream's threat to one day claim him. Number 7, Dazzler. Dazzler is here not because of how weak she seems, but because of how truly incredible her powers are. The only thing that really makes her seemingly useless is the fact that Alison Blair typically prefers to use her powers for her performances as opposed to being, you know, the team leader for the X-Men, which honestly, she easily could be, and actually has been in regards to multiversal teams that exist. She's played the role of leader before, both with her band and with her fellow mutant heroes, but not for the main X-Men team. No, no, no. Dazzler has powers that have been described before to be potentially unlimited in terms of just how much damage she could do. She can transmute sound into light, and while her light shows in her concerts might seem kinda tame, she has also used her power set to defeat and defend against heavy hitters like Ulysses Claw, who she permanently defeated, Enchantress, and the Hulk. Number 6, Witchfire. I think Witchfire is a super cool hero. She not only looks cool, but she also is a magical hero, one of the most powerful kinds out there, if You ask me. One of them. Not the only one, but definitely one of my tops. But still, among those who are gifted with magic, Witchfire's Rebecca Carstairs usually ends up being regarded as lower on the totem pole. I'm sure there are actually many of you out there who aren't even familiar with this character. And to show how tragically weak she is, shortly after her first appearance in the Prime Earth continuity, she's permanently defeated, with her soul ending up being trapped after the complete destruction of her physical body. Pretty tragic, really, because I just feel like she's so cool. How could you do her like that? Number 5. Cypher. Cypher I'd like to rank a little bit lower on this list because calling him weak feels kind of unfair, considering how integral he's been lately in regards to helping kickstart Krakoa, especially in the comics. But Cypher is still one of those characters that people attribute as being weak because of his power set, and so for that reason, I'm still gonna count him here. But of course, his powers actually happen to be some of the most useful in the comics. It's kind of like a misunderstanding, especially when we consider that they also apply to Cypher being able to communicate with tech and using his ability to understand and communicate in all kinds of languages to become a skilled fighter, which has been interpreted by certain writers as its own language, so Cypher can also be great at fighting. However, not all writers seem to be able to agree on this point, because some people have also seemingly forgot that Cypher is supposed to be really great at fighting. Number 4. Tracy 13. Tracy 13 is a magic user who isn't as well known as others like Zatanna, John Constantine, or Dr. Fate from DC Comics. And in that regard, considering she hasn't had as much of a chance to prove herself, she could be considered weak. That being said, she still is a magic user and one who is the daughter of both a magical skeptic and a powerful sorceress, meaning that she possesses both the knowledge of when to be doubtful about someone's prowess and skills and the natural aptitude to perform magic herself, learning from her mother before her mother passed away. In the Prime Earth continuity, the type of magic that Tracy uses is actually known as urban magic, which allows her to fuel her abilities through the power and spirit of sprawling and built up cities. Personally, I also think that's just like a super cool niche magic thing, urban magic. Number 3, dupe. Unsurprisingly, yes, a lot of seemingly weak heroes who actually happen to have pretty impressive powers come from the mutant camp of Marvel Comics. Although I don't know if it's ever actually been cemented exactly what dupe is at all, whether that be mutant or something else entirely. Maybe an alien, who knows. However, dupe has definitely found a home with the mutants, so I think we'd still consider him to be an honorary mutant at the very least if we wanted. Dupe has to be one of the weirdest characters of all time, especially when it comes to his storylines. Dupe is also weirdly romantic for a floating green alien language speaking creature that was possibly created as a result of government experimentation. Kinda looks like a jelly bean. Yet also somehow he has a mother. Dupe is a ridiculous character, but when he needs to, he seems to be able to exhibit almost any superpower one could think of. Number 2, Booster Gold. Booster Gold could be considered weak because his powers aren't even really powers that he was born with or incurred from a wacky lab accident gone wrong or worked really hard to earn abilities, but instead are fueled by technology that he stole in the future, which is where, or rather when, he's from. The future. He used tech to travel to the past and with his knowledge of the past as well, aimed to become a hero in that time period. There, Booster used his tech as well as his knowledge from the future to try and become a hero. And well, he succeeded! Hooray! However, just because Booster can do things like time travel doesn't mean he's always the best at heroics. Case in point, the time he tried to give a gift to Batman and Catwoman in honor of their wedding. His gift was to travel back in time and prevent Bruce's parents from being lost to him all those years ago. But in so doing, this also prevented Bruce and Selena from ever getting together and also caused, well, a lot of other problems. I mean, Batman wouldn't be Batman without that loss, right? Potentially. Yes, actually, I think that story confirmed that. Number 1, Squirrel Girl. Squirrel Girl is one of my all-time favorite heroes, even if some out there consider her to be weak sauce. Not me though, I see her true strength, but I can't ignore the fact that on paper, her powers, her mutation, well, it all does sound pretty ridiculous. And she should, by all intents and purposes, not be as OP as we know her to be. However, that being said, I feel like we need to acknowledge the fact that Doreen's abilities, or more specifically, her people skills, are honestly insanely powerful. Squirrel Girl has the ability to befriend pretty much anyone, no matter their alignment. And she is really, and I mean really, good at helping convince criminals to call it quits, either for the day or honestly, for the rest of their entire lives.